Good morning, everyone. We'll convene the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. I'll introduce committee members at this time. We have Deputy Chair, Ms. Colleen Young, Lloyd Minster. We have Mr. Dana Skoropad, Mr. Hugh Nerline, Mr. Delbert Kirsch, Mr. Todd Gowdy, Mr. Marv Friesen, and Ms. Alina Young, Regina University. I'd like to introduce officials from the Provincial Comptroller's Office. Terry Payton, Provincial Comptroller, one of the finest lake trout fishers in the province, as well as Jen Clark, Director of Finance and Policy. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to welcome and introduce our Provincial Auditor, Tara Clement, and her officials that are with us here today. It looks like it's a little lighter duty for Ms. Lowe this morning than it was yesterday. A busy day for her. And we've moved these, just as a note, we've moved these hearings inside the chamber. Of course, this isn't our normal place to hold these meetings. We'd be normally meeting in room 8. We've done this to make sure that there's space and doing our best to make sure that we're accommodating concerns and ensuring we're able to have some distance and hold this meeting in a safe way amidst the pandemic. With respect to our agenda here today, we've had a request to reorder some of the considerations, which makes a lot of sense. And I would just look for confirmation from the committee that folks are fine with going through the Ministry of Education and School Divisions first, and then we'll flip into the chapters relating directly to the Ministry of Education. So I'm just looking to see if folks are agreed on that front. That's how we'll proceed. I'll also table at this point PAC 4329, Ministry of Education status update dated January 12th, 2022. And I'd like to thank everybody involved, school divisions through the Ministry of Education, that have put together their responses on those status updates. They really help committee members to focus their questions here today and aid the consideration. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome all the officials that are here, certainly from the Ministry of Education, Deputy Minister Johnson, and officials, senior officials that are with us, as well as school division officials that are present here right now and that will be joining us throughout the morning from various school divisions across Saskatchewan. We will start then with our considerations. I know the auditor will have the first two chapters on our agenda together. Those would be Chapter 5 and Chapter 2 from the 2020 Report Volume 1 and the 2021 Report Volume 1 respectively. And at this time, I'd ask Deputy Minister Johnson to introduce the officials that are with her here today, and certainly the ones that are specific to these considerations. We'll hold comments on these chapters right now, or further comments. We'll turn it over to the auditor at that point, and then we'll welcome comments subsequent to that. So I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson for introductions.
All right, thank you. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And I'm just checking if the mic is working okay. Perfect. All right, so we're pleased to be here today to speak to the progress that the Ministry of Education and school divisions are making on the recommendations provided by the Office of the Provincial Auditor. I'd like to extend special thanks to our school division officials for being here today to answer questions on the progress that they have made on the recommendations that are before us today. You will know, having reviewed the agenda, that today we are looking at 5 chapters related to the ministry and 15 chapters related to the school divisions, those 15 chapters impacting 13 school divisions. Today, 3 of those school divisions will have officials present at the meeting. As you can appreciate, we are operating, and school divisions in particular, are operating in very challenging times. And as such, I took the liberty of talking to several of the school divisions to let them know that some of them did not need to attend the session today in person. They are watching the live stream. So when we get to those school divisions that do not have someone here in person, if you have a question for them that I cannot answer, we are happy to, by text message, relay that to them and get an answer from them, and we'll respond in that fashion. And at this point, I would like to make a pitch for having the rules adjusted so that we can have virtual attendees here. It would certainly benefit, thanks for that thumbs up. It would certainly benefit our school divisions who, in many cases, have to travel, as in the case of Northern Lights School Division, who is here with us today, who have to travel 16 hours round trip in order to perform their fiduciary and stewardship functions for this committee. And again, we take those responsibilities seriously, but certainly would appreciate in the future the opportunity to have some of our school divisions officials attend virtually. Having said that, I will introduce the colleagues that we have here from, to answer your questions today. From the ministry, we have Jerry Craswell, Assistant Deputy Minister, Susan Nedelkov-Anderson, Assistant Deputy Minister, Sarah Haralook, the Acting Executive Director of Corporate Services, And coming up here shortly from Northern Lights School Division, we have Jason Young, our Director of Education, and Tom Harrington, the Chief Financial Officer for Northern Lights. Also from St. Paul's Roman Catholic Separate School Division, we have Joel Lloyd, the Chief Financial Officer, and Mark Gobet, Coordinator of Educational Technology. And also present today from Saskatoon Public School Division is Michelle Howard, Coordinator of Learning Supports, and Trish Reeve, Superintendent of Education. So at that, I think I will end my comments there, and we'll let the proceedings carry on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister Johnson, and to respond to your plea for virtual hearings and flexibility on these fronts. This is something that I'm fully supportive of, and that we've been aiming to advance in this Assembly for the last couple of years, and something we'll continue to push for. And you've identified well why that makes sense. So thank you very much. I'd also just want to say thank you to you, and importantly, all those school divisions across Saskatchewan, folks that are involved in the work that we're considering here today, and those that are leading and serving every single day during a historic challenge. And so we just say to all of them, thank you so very much for what they do. I'll turn it over now to the Provincial Auditor's Office to lead the presentation on chapters 5 and 2, and then we'll flip it back your way.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Chair, members and officials. With me today is Mr. Trevor St. John. He is the Deputy Provincial Auditor for the Education Division in our office, and he is responsible for the portfolio of work that does involve the education sector. Also behind me is Ms. Kim Lowe, who is the liaison with this committee from our office as well. So Trevor will present the chapters on the agenda for the audits with regards to the Ministry of Education and the school divisions. So after each chapter or presentation, he will pause for the committee's discussion and deliberation. There are a few chapters, I believe it's about 7, that do have new recommendations for the committee's consideration. And before I turn it over to Trevor, I do want to thank the ministry officials and all of the school divisions for the cooperation that was extended to us during the course of our audit work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Trevor.
Thank you. I'll present those first 2 chapters together as mentioned. Chapter 5 of our 2020 Volume 1 and Chapter 2 of our 2021 Volume 1 report the results of our annual integrated audits of school divisions for the years ended August 31st, 2019 and August 31st, 2020. As noted in the chapter, our office works with school division appointed auditors to carry out these audits. In these chapters, we report the school divisions for both years ended had reliable financial statements, complied with authorities governing their activities, and had effective rules and procedures to safeguard public resources, except for the matters we'll discuss today. These 2 chapters contain 4 new recommendations for the committee's consideration. I will present the recommendations from Chapter 5 of our 2020 Volume 1 first, with updates from the 2021 report where appropriate. On page 43 of the 2020 report, we recommend Northern Lights School Division prepare and review monthly bank reconciliations and financial reports for school-generated funds. During 2018-19, Northern Lights did not prepare monthly bank reconciliations and financial reports for all school-generated funds, such as student fees and proceeds from fundraising activities. Not regularly preparing and reviewing financial reports for school-generated funds increases the risk that money may be misappropriated. Inappropriate expenses may be incurred, and revenues recorded in the financial statements may not be complete. Our 2021 report provides an update that during the fiscal year 1920, Northern Lights implemented the recommendation and prepared and reviewed monthly bank reconciliations. On page 43, we made 2 new recommendations for Northwest School Division. First, we recommend Northwest School Division independently review and approve monthly bank reconciliations. Northwest did not independently review and approve monthly bank reconciliations. Regular reconciliations and the review and approval of such reconciliations checks that all charges to bank accounts are proper and all money has been received and deposited into the right accounts. It also checks the accuracy and reliability of the accounting records. The second recommendation is Northwest School Division independently review and approve journal entries. Audit testing identified some journal entries made by the school division were not independently reviewed and approved. Lack of independent review and approval increases the risk of unauthorized entries into the accounting records, which could result in decision makers using inaccurate financial information. Our 2021 report provides an update that during the 1920 fiscal year, Northwest School Division implemented both of those recommendations and independently reviewed and approved bank reconciliations and journal entries. On page 43, we provide an update on outstanding recommendation related to Sunwest School Division number 207. We continue to recommend that Sunwest test its disaster recovery plan. Without a tested disaster recovery plan, it may not work as expected, and the school division may not be able to deliver its programs and services as expected. Our 2021 report provides an update on this recommendation and notes that the recommendation remains outstanding as of August 2020. In section 5 of the 2020 chapter, we also summarize two recommendations that Lloydminster Public School Division number 99 implemented in 2018-19 fiscal year. It now independently reviewed and approved bank reconciliations and journal entries. Chapter 2 of our 2020 report, Volume 1, contains one new recommendation for the committee's consideration and updates which I already covered when I was discussing the 2020 report. On page 9 of this chapter, we recommend Regina School Division, number 4, follow its purchasing policy for its facilities department contracts. Regina School Division did not follow its purchasing policy and publicly tender purchases, obtain prior approval for single source purchases, or obtain appropriate approval for certain facilities department purchases. Audit testing identified 3 facility management contracts that did not follow expected purchasing processes. Following its competitive procurement method, policies for buying goods and services helps ensure staff treat suppliers equitably and fairly, and helps Regina Public buy goods and services at a fair price. Contracts entered into without the proper authority increase the risk of fraudulent transactions or contracting for items Regina Public does not need. I will pause now for the committee's consideration of these two chapters.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the focus of the work. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson to respond, or the school divisions to respond, and we'll open it up for questions.
All right, thank you. The Ministry appreciates the recommendations from the Provincial Auditor on the school division's 2018-19 and 2019-20 annual integrated audits. As they noted, they worked with appointed auditors to carry out the annual integrated audits of the school divisions, and the auditor reviewed the opinions of the appointed auditor on the reliability of financial statements, effectiveness and processes to safeguard public resources and compliance with authorities. Therefore, so with respect to Chapter 5 and Chapter 2, we were pleased to see that a number of the recommendations that had been made had been cleared by the follow-up in the report of 2021, Volume 1, Chapter 2. There are, as they have noted, a couple of recommendations that remain. Sunwest School Division in particular is continuing to work on their IT disaster recovery plan. They have a plan in place to fully address this recommendation, and they have indicated that they will have the necessary work completed by August of 2022. I do have a few more details related to Sunwest that I can provide the committee if you are interested. And I see a nod over there, so I'll just go straight to that. With Sunwest, what they have reported to us is that they had their initial disaster recovery plan approved by their board on January 22nd, 2019. And as the auditor noted, the initial recommendations, I believe, were made in 2017. So they have had their initial disaster recovery plan approved by their board in January of 2019. They have held meetings with Cisco, SaskTel, and Charter regarding their plan and alignment with current industry best practices. As a result of COVID, SunWest was also, like many school divisions, required to move online quickly. So with that, they updated the existing disaster recovery plan. They have signed an agreement with SaskTel regarding hosting services, and that agreement was signed effective April 1st of 2021. And the IT department is continuing to test components of their plan. They have also plans to move Navision to cloud hosting in January of 2022, and all services to be cloud hosted by the end of the year through the SaskTel domain hosting. As such, SaskTel is an essential part of support for the SunWest School Division Disaster Recovery Plan. And I will just conclude those remarks by reiterating that they intend for the plan to be fully implemented by August 31st, 2022.
Thank you very much for the report on the actions that have been taken towards implementation. I'll open it up for questions at this time. Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and nice to see you, Deputy Minister, and as well to all of your officials and representatives from school division land who were able to be here today. It is nice to see some familiar faces, and I would note for the record, I was, of course, paying close attention to your remarks, but I was observing the number of people with connections to the education sector sitting amongst the elected folks on this committee. I believe we have 3 former trustees, and in addition to that, 2 former educators, if I'm correct, which is a remarkable number of people from the sector, and I think speaks to the caliber of people within it. So with those glowing comments, I'll proceed to assist kind of with the direction of my questioning. I'll just proceed through the recommendations as they're laid out from 1 through till 3, I believe. And I would like to just begin with a couple questions as would relate to Northern Lights and recommendation number 1, which is noted is partially implemented.
The Director of Education, Jason Young, and the CFO, Tom Harrington, to join us here. Thank you.
Jason Young, glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity for us to showcase our work in Northern Saskatchewan. So grateful for this opportunity. Tom is our CFO for our school division, so he's been working diligently on adjusting some of these recommendations. So I think he can speak to part of the recommendation for number 1.
With we have a range of schools. We have schools from 500 students down to 10 students. So I would say it's partially implemented because most of our large to medium schools are already doing the bank recs monthly and they send them in. Some of our small schools, they have very little activity, so they don't necessarily submit a bank rec every month. What we are doing is during this, I guess last school year, we kept closer track to make sure monthly we were getting those bank recs in and tracking those things. And then this year, we're making sure all our schools from big to small are all using the school cash software, which has the bank rec function in it. And then we can look at those reports remotely and we have access to everything. So that's where we're at right now.
Thank you, Tom. So that those were, I believe you covered off both of my questions there. So just to ensure I understand in regards to the strategy to onboard the schools not yet using school cash software, they're all, as of August, using this software?
It's during this current school year we're making sure everybody else, by the end of this school year.
Pardon me, by the end of this school year. And my last question as it relates to Northern Lights was It's noted in the update that it's, and as you've expanded upon in your comments, it's the smaller schools within Northern Lights who just by virtue of their makeup, it makes it more challenging to do that if they have, for example, 10 students and limited school-based activities. So my question was going to be, what constitutes a small school for Northern Lights School Division?
Small school, I would say, yeah, kind of 50 and under, I would say, 50 students and under. I'd say kind of the next jump is the 80 to 100 range, so those schools are submitting those reports monthly. It's just the really small schools don't necessarily have a lot of admin support, so it's tough to, and I think we also look at supporting those ones internally. Maybe we do those at central office because we have a little bit more, I guess, people with those skills to do that, so that's what we're looking at as well.
And so recognizing the strategy to have schools onboarded by this year, as you've spoken to date, how many wouldn't be using that? Do you know off the top of your head?
I'd say probably half a dozen, about that.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions.
Questions as it relates to this recommendation with Northern Lights, because I know we have other school divisions. No other questions. Thanks for being here. You preside over such a beautiful region in the province, beautiful people, wonderful communities, and just thank you to you and your entire team. We'll move, I guess, on to the other recommendations at this point, if there's other questions. Ms. Young, Regina University. She always comes prepared.
Very kind, Mr. Chair. I do have two questions about the recommendations made to the Northwest School Division, which I do note are fully implemented. But the status update provided to the committee notes that the explanation was provided in an email stream to the provincial auditor, and none of the details are available for us. So I was just wondering, Deputy Minister, if there was any expansion on that update that could be provided as to how the remaining two recommendations, which would be, I believe, 2 and 3, were fully implemented by Northwest.
Thank you. I'll just check my notes for Northwest. And so the reference to the email stream there is simply an email between the provincial auditor's office and the either ourselves at the ministry or the school division, noting that they have examined it and concur that the recommendations have been fully implemented, which of course is what the auditor's office mentioned when they were highlighting the updates in the 2021 chapter.
Thank you, and I should note as you have mentioned that you have people watching remotely and texting in as well. If there's ever a delay, because I do believe there is a lag from the video in the chambers to the outside world, I believe the committee's very content to wait and proceed and receive that information when it does come in. My last questions are in relation to the recommendation for SunWest. And I am correct in remembering it's SunWest who is the distance learning center, is that correct?
We do operate a distance learning center near Kenaston, yes.
And I suppose two questions then, Deputy Minister. Does the operation of this program add additional complexity to the disaster recovery for the IT department for SunWest?
Well, I guess in my view, I would say possibly yes and no. Yes, in that having another delivery channel for your educational services is an added complexity to a school division. No, in that it is that online service delivery model is one that most school divisions operate. And so it's not unusual for a school division to need to keep that in mind as they're working out their IT disaster recovery plan.
And in regards to that disaster recovery plan, it's noted that SunWest disaster recovery plan will essentially be that of SaskTel's. And not being an expert on disaster recovery plans myself, does the Crown Telecom plan appropriately duplicate to the ed sector?
Sorry, does the Crown what?
Does the disaster relief plan appropriately duplicate to the ed sector? Perhaps I'm misunderstanding the recommendation or the update, but it's noted that for a disaster recovery plan, SunWest will be adopting SaskTel's, anticipated to be implemented by the end of August of this year.
Yeah, so I think we'll certainly put that question to SunWest via text, and we'll get back to you with a fuller answer. My initial explanation, I think, would be to say that while they're using SaskTel as a data or a host for host services, that addresses part of their issue, and SaskTel's disaster recovery plan for being the provider of host services will in fact form part of SunWest's recovery plan too, but that would not be the only component of the IT disaster recovery plan for SunWest.
Thank you. So I'm understanding that it is a key component of that plan, but not the totality of the disaster recovery plan for SunWest.
Be my take on it.
And my last question is in relation to Chapter 5 and the disaster recovery plan for SunWest. I note the planned implementation by August 31st, 2022, and I suppose my question likely to SunWest would be if there's, if it's anticipated that the plan will be tested prior to this date.
Understanding.
Okay. No further questions on this chapter, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members on these two chapters? Not seeing any. With respect to the 2020 report, Volume 1, Chapter 5, I'd welcome a motion that we concur and note progress with respect to recommendation number 1. Mr. Nerline moves. All agreed? Agreed. That's carried. With respect to recommendations 2 and 3, I'd welcome a recommendation that we concur and note compliance. Moved by Deputy Chair Young, Lloyd-Minster. All agreed? Agreed. That's carried. Moving along to Chapter 2, relating to Regina Public School Division, Chapter 2 of the 2021 report, Volume 1. I'd welcome a recommendation that we concur and note compliance with for recommendation 1. Do we have a mover? Mr. Friesen, all agreed? Agreed. That's carried. Okay. We'll move along. Thanks, folks, everyone that's been involved in these chapters and the work, and some of the work that still is underway to ensure implementation. We'll move along to Chapter 8 of the 29 report, and I'll turn it over to the Auditor's Office.
Thank you. I'll give a presentation on Chapter 8, Northern Lights School Division Purchasing Goods and Services. Strong processes to purchase goods and services supports transparency, fairness, and achievement of best value in purchasing activities. Not having effective purchasing processes increases the risk of not using public resources wisely, increases risk of fraud, or increases potential legal risks. Northern Lights School Division spends about $26 million on goods and services each year. Chapter 8 reports the results of our audit of Northern Lights School Division's processes to purchase goods and services. We concluded that school division did not have effective processes for purchasing goods and services. We made 14 recommendations for improvements, and my presentation will focus on these 14 areas. The first recommendation on page 127, we recommend Northern Lights School Division number 113 update its purchasing requirements to align with applicable external trade agreements, establish requirements for staff involved with purchases to declare real or perceived conflict of interest, set out requirements for the use of different purchasing methods, and incorporate expectations for use of contracts. We found that the division's policy to favor local suppliers was not consistent with the terms of applicable external trade agreements, and thus may result in the appearance the division would provide unfair or unequal treatment of suppliers and may expose the division to financial penalties under these trade agreements. We also found that the division's procurement policies do not require staff involved in purchasing decisions to declare in writing as to whether any real or perceived conflict of interest exists, such as an ownership interest in a supplier, and outline potential mitigation to these conflicts. Staff with real or perceived conflicts of interest may appear biased in their decision-making and increase the risk of the division not treating potential suppliers fairly and equitably. The division's procurement policies also do not set out requirements for the use of different purchasing methods, such as when to use tenders or quotes. Establishing guidance about the use of different purchasing methods will provide clarity to staff and help the division purchase goods and services in a consistent manner. And the division's procurement policies do not set out expectations for when staff must obtain a written contract for certain types of goods and services. Not having clear expectations increases the risk of staff not using an appropriate form of contract, possibly exposing the division to unwanted legal or financial risks. The second recommendation is on page 128, and we recommend Northern Lights set out in writing its requirements for using single or sole source purchasing. We found that the division periodically single or sole source purchases of goods or services. However, contrary to the good practice, the division has not set requirements as to when it is appropriate to single or sole source goods and services, requirements on what staff must consider and document when using this procurement method, and what approvals are necessary. Without a policy to establish appropriate requirements for using single and sole source purchasing methods, the division is at risk of not facilitating fair and equitable treatment of suppliers and may not obtain best value in making purchasing decisions. The third and fourth recommendations are on page 130. These are, we recommend Northern Lights revise its purchase card guidelines to align with good purchasing practices. For example, required approvals processes for changing transaction limits and restrictions on use. And we recommend that Northern Lights actively monitor adherence of cardholders with its purchasing card guidelines. The division's purchase card guidelines do not sufficiently align with good purchasing practices, such as setting out all required approvals, processes for changing transaction limits, and restrictions on use. In addition, the division does not actively monitor cardholders' adherence with its purchase card guidelines. Without comprehensive guidelines for purchase cards, the division may be susceptible to fraudulent transactions and at risk of staff not understanding their responsibilities when it comes to purchase card use and approving transactions. The fifth recommendation on the next page, we recommend Northern Lights agree purchases on monthly fleet card invoices to supporting receipts prior to making payment. The division does not agree monthly invoices to supporting individual fuel receipts for purchases made through credit cards or fleet cards prior to paying the monthly invoice. We found that the division did not monitor receipt of the monthly travel logs for each of its passenger vans. In addition, staff do not agree or append individual vehicle fuel receipts to the monthly fleet card invoices. Not agreeing fleet card receipts to purchases on the monthly fleet card statements increases the risk of the division paying for inappropriate purchases and not detecting misuse of fleet cards promptly. In addition, the division cannot know or assess staff use of fleet cards when staff do not retain all receipts. The sixth recommendation is also on page 131. We recommend the Board of Education of Northern Lights School Division approve the division's key policies related to the purchase of goods and services. The Board of the Division did not review or approve the division's purchasing policy, construction policy, or delegation of authority to approve the initiation or payment of purchases. We found the division did not maintain evidence of the last time it reviewed and updated its purchasing policies or its delegation of authority to initiate the approval of purchases. In addition, the division did not formally approve its policies. Board approval of key operational policies is essential, as the policies should set out the board's expectations for their operations of the organization. Inappropriately designed and non-approved purchasing policies and delegations of authority can lead to financial, legal, and reputational risks to the organization. The seventh recommendation is on page 133. We recommend Northern Lights School Division consistently document its evaluation of suppliers when tendering for the purchase of goods and services. The division does not consistently maintain adequate documentation of its evaluation of suppliers when tendering for the purchase of goods and services. In 15 of 17 tenders tested, the division did not document its evaluation of the suppliers using the selection criteria it established for the tenders. When the division does not document its evaluation of bids, it is not complying with its purchasing policy. Also, it cannot sufficiently support its supplier selection decision and demonstrate achievement of best value for purchasing decisions. The eighth recommendation on page 134, we recommend Northern Lights School Division maintain appropriate documentation of its tender communications with suppliers. The division did not consistently maintain appropriate documentation of communications with suppliers during the tender process. Its purchasing policy does not address its expectations associated with supplier communications. In addition, it did not request feedback from unsuccessful suppliers to assist with improving its tendering process. If the division does not maintain appropriate documentation of its communications with suppliers, it can be difficult for the division to demonstrate that its purchasing process is fair and transparent, and it may also be in violation of external trade agreements. The ninth recommendation on page 135, we recommend Northern Lights establish a standard minimum amount of time to allow suppliers to respond to tenders. The division has not established a standard minimum amount of time to ensure suppliers have sufficient time to submit responses to tenders. For 16 of the 17 tenders we tested, the division did not allow a tendering time consistent with good practice. Not providing suppliers with sufficient time to prepare tender responses increases the likelihood of suppliers choosing not to respond, resulting in the division having fewer options to acquire the goods and services it needs. Fewer options may increase the risk of not achieving best value. Also, establishing standard minimum amounts of time helps ensure it treats suppliers fairly and equitably. The 10th recommendation on page 136, we recommend Northern Lights periodically assess the robustness of the service contract and purchase order templates used for purchasing goods and services. The division does not periodically review its contract templates for completeness and robustness. Its service contract and purchase order templates do not include clauses or provisions that are typically necessary when purchasing goods and services. Maintaining robust standard wording of contracts or contract templates helps organizations save time on purchasing activities and can reduce legal costs. They can also help both staff and suppliers to consider key aspects common to purchasing certain types of goods and services. Not having robust contract templates increases legal or financial risk where signed contracts do not sufficiently address relevant contract terms. The 11th recommendation, also on page 136, we recommend Northern Lights maintain complete documentation of properly authorized contracts with suppliers before the division receives the related goods or services. The division did not consistently maintain timely or complete documentation of contracts with suppliers. For the 24 purchases we tested, we noted several instances where the division signed the contract after it received the goods and services. The division could not locate, or the division could not locate the contract, or the division did not maintain complete contract information. If suppliers provide goods and services to the division before finalizing a contract, suppliers may not fully understand their responsibilities to the division, potentially resulting in suppliers not meeting the division needs. Not maintaining complete documentation of signed contracts makes it difficult to hold suppliers accountable for providing goods and services when performance issues arise. In addition, if appropriate division staff do not sign contracts as expected, there is increased of the risk of the division entering into contracts that do not fully meet its needs. The 12th recommendation on page 137, we recommend Northern Lights School Division separate incompatible purchasing duties. For example, initiating purchases, tendering, receiving goods and services, approving invoices for payment, adding suppliers to the financial system, and closely monitor transactions where it is not feasible to do so. The division did not take additional steps to actively identify or monitor transactions when the same individual carries out more than one of the purchasing duties in an individual purchase. We found the division did not provide financial staff with written guidance about not processing requests for payment where the same individual had approved initiation of the purchase, received the goods, and requested the payment. Providing one individual with the ability to control multiple aspects of the purchasing process does not appropriately separate incompatible duties and increases the risk of fraudulent transactions going undetected. The 13th recommendation on page 139, we recommend Northern Lights document its due diligence procedures used to validate suppliers before entering them into the financial system and keep the supplier listing in the financial system up to date. The division does not document due diligence procedures taken to confirm the validity of suppliers before paying them, or properly maintaining its listing of suppliers included in the financial system. In addition, 2 individuals with the ability to enter new suppliers into the financial system can approve invoices for payment and other financial transactions. The division informally assesses the validity of suppliers upon receipt of invoices for payment after suppliers provide the goods or services. The division's purchasing policies do not require staff to research the validity of a new supplier prior to making a purchase. Not carrying out sufficient due diligence procedures to confirm the validity of suppliers before entering them into the financial system increases the risk of making payments to fictitious suppliers or fraudulent changes to supplier information, which can result in payments to scam artists. Also, periodic maintenance of suppliers included in the financial system can reduce the risk of duplicate or fraudulent payments and help monitor the existence of fictitious suppliers. In addition, we found the division, through its assignment of IT user access, gave 2 individuals incompatible responsibilities. These individuals can approve invoices for payment and add suppliers to the division's financial system. Allowing users with the ability to approve or enter payments into the financial system, in addition to the ability of adding suppliers, does not appropriately separate incompatible duties. Not appropriately separating incompatible duties between different individuals increases the risk of fraud and not detecting errors. The 14th and last recommendation on page 139, we recommend Northern Lights School Division require staff to document the receipt of heating fuel purchases and to adhere to its delegation of authority when approving invoices for payment. The division did not consistently document the receipt and appropriate approval for the payment of heating fuel purchases. For 2 heating fuel purchases we tested, division staff approving the invoice did not have authority to do so, and in another instance, we were unable to determine if the division appropriately separated purchasing duties as goods received was not documented. If the division does not require staff to approve invoices in accordance with its delegation of authority and document its receipts of goods and services, there is increased risk of the division paying for goods and services it did not receive. That ends my presentation, and I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you for the report. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson and Director and officials of Northern Lights to respond.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of sentences from me, and then I'll turn it over to Jason Young and Tom Harrington. Again, we want to thank the auditor for the work that they have done. We appreciate their attention to these issues and concur with their recommendations. We are also pleased to note that the Northern Lights School Division has taken steps as of December 31st, 2021 to implement or begin implementing many of these recommendations made by the auditor. The division will expand on this, but they have made plans to either partially or fully implement 12 of the 14 recommendations by August 31st, 2022. And the final 2 recommendations are planned to be implemented by September of 2024. With that, I will turn it over to Jason and Tom if you have any opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions again.
Sure. I guess I wouldn't starting with questions that anyone might have about the recommendations that were provided. So I would like to entertain questions, I guess, from anyone on the floor around this. I think we've been working really hard at addressing some of these recommendations. And I can just share with you just some of the challenges around that for us. And I would say one of them starts with partnerships. You know, we have increased number of partners that want to partner with Northern Lights School Division. In Northern Saskatchewan, we are the largest employer. How is it that a nonprofit is the largest employer in Northern Saskatchewan? You have 700 employees, and there's no other organization in the north that has that many employees. We've got a number of people who are unemployed looking for work. One of the challenges with the recommendation around the external trade agreement, I realize that's something we need to be aligned with, was difficult for our board to accept that. You mean we can't have our local people who are working, trying to make ends meet, do the work for us in the organization? And it's tough to convey that to the board to say we have to be in compliance, right? So, and so we recognize that, so that's where we have to pivot, and we've got to follow that. So that is a challenge. I think with increased partnerships I'm seeing in the school division, you know, it's fantastic to see. The Ministry of Education, Saskatchewan Health Authority, they want to partner with us. They give us dollars to implement programs in the school division. And it's exciting, but someone has to be responsible for administrating all of those dollars that come in. And when that administration of those dollars falls upon my department who deals with, you know, the finances, and that's Tom mainly, and one other person under him that does that. So we recognize some of those challenges, and I think recognizing those, trying to mitigate some of those, you know, risks by some strategies and some solutions we have internally that we're looking at to address those and meet some of these timeline targets of implementation by August 31st, 2022. So some of the partnerships I'm just thinking of are things like ISSI. We're looking at the Jordan's Principal funding. We're looking at partnerships with Métis Nation, KFN, FRC, and there's a host of others that just come and say, hey, we've got money for you, run this program in the north. And I'll say, sure, of course I'm going to say yes to the dollars, but then I guess there's sort of just this, you've got this just bottleneck, right, of just administration of those dollars to ensure that they are sort of, I guess, appropriately, that process is done appropriately to meet the expectations of, you know, the auditors and of our own, you know, standards that we have in our school division. So I think those are just some of my opening remarks. Lastly, I'd also say that we have 200 teacher housing units that require you know, ongoing maintenance, and that's where some of those fuel costs come in, where sometimes it is the co-op that's in a northern remote community that's providing fuel to a teacherage, and that teacher needs that fuel that day because it's -40 out, and sometimes we might just sort of sign off that receipt and someone will sign it off, right, because of the urgency of that particular situation and that particular context. So those are just some of the challenges we face and dealing with, you know, our region. I'm not complaining, proud of the work. I love the work because, I mean, there are so many challenges, but we're prepared to continue to do the work that we need to support our people in Northern Saskatchewan. When I say that there are 200 teacher housing units in Northern Lights, you know, I think of just the fact that it's like we're running a town in addition to trying to provide education in Northern Lights School Division. We've got, we provide an education to students, but we also run a town half the size of Kipling, Saskatchewan, right? So it's just, those are just some of the challenges we're presented with, but we are optimistic with our timeline to implement some of these goals or just implement some of these items within the timeline provided, just because of the other internal strategies we have in place to address these items. So I think those are just my opening remarks, and I don't know, I think if there are any other questions, I appreciate the questions, and then I guess Tom could speak to some of the specifics around the accounting side of things in our school division.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the context as well. And without a doubt, you're presiding over a school division in a region that's diverse and different than any other part of the province. So thanks for giving some of that context here today and for the leadership. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Northern Lights, for those introductory comments. One piece of clarification, perhaps, before I begin, to help me focus. Director Young, I think you mentioned that Tom, it's yourself and one other. Is that the full staffing component for kind of the financial services portion?
Yes, in financial services, we'd have myself as the CFO, then we have a finance manager, and then we have 3 accounts payable clerks.
So you would have essentially 5 individuals total responsible for. Okay.
Yeah.
In regards to a number of the recommendations, it's most of the actions and implementation are contingent on updating board and organizational policies, either in the creation of them or kind of that routine updating. So going forward, Director, I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the kind of concrete monitoring or routine updating that is planned for the board and administration going forward.
I think one of the things we'd like to do is really a new AP we've created. So I mean, the AP is an AP that other school divisions have in place, so we can work with those other divisions and looking at that AP and I guess modifying that to meet sort of what we need, and that's just an administrative procedure as to how we sort of operate within the system, so financially. So I think that's one key piece for us, is just looking at that AP, sharing that with the board, and begin implementing the AP. But I think the implementation piece will also require additional personnel resources to manage that. So that's just something we'll be looking at doing as well. We have to, so.
One question specifically for recommendation, I believe number 9, that the Northern Lights School Division establish a standard minimum amount of time to allow suppliers to respond to tenders. The auditor spoke to some of the challenges that can occur for divisions who don't, or organizations that don't have that standard minimum amount of time for suppliers to respond to tenders, and I believe recommended a 21-day minimum for tender response, which is detailed in that AP 515 that you've spoken of. Has this been a challenge in the past for Northern Lights?
The tender period? Yeah, I think at times it can be just trying to get that tender out in time to allow that period for people to respond. I think the tendering process is one we focused on, and we kind of already focused on that once before to improve our processes. And since this, we've made sure in our recent tenders we have very clear a point system for evaluating. I think before, I think it said 15 of 17 weren't documented, which would be true, but there would be. We didn't just put it out and then pick it out of the hatch where we're going to award it to. We would have talked to the board about it. Just we were weak in our documentation. We didn't document the process on how we came to who we selected. So we've tightened that up to make sure we have a clear document. Here's the criteria. Here's how we scored everybody, and here's who we recommend awarding it to. And we have, just with everything going on, it's that sometimes we would put out a tender and just it's a time crunch, so you don't allow enough time. But we have to make sure that we do that.
Thank you. Just a couple questions in regards to the provisions for local or northern supplier preference. And Director Young, you spoke to that a little bit in your comments, I believe specifically to fuel purchases. For the committee, could you expand on your comments in regards to instances where provisions for local or northern suppliers, and being able to make those choices is more feasible for your division.
One example that would come to mind is just related to maybe facilities, you know, just in terms of we've got lots of people who have a carpentry trades background, you know, and we've got some local companies that would want to sort of bid for a job to do some renovations within one of our teacherages or with a school or with a specific school. And sometimes they just might not be eligible or meet that criteria, right, to be able to be given that job. And I think that's just a specific example that I can think of around the facility side of things. That's one that comes to mind, but I'm not sure if there are others I can think of in terms of other departments within the organization. I'm not sure if Tom has another specific example.
Yeah, well, just more in general, I think everybody knows our region is, you know, high unemployment, all that. So it was very important to our board to try and give work to local people. Their old policy was not compliant with legislation and agreements. So within the new board policy, they've tried to keep some of that, but keep it in compliance with the legislation. So you might award a tender and, you know, one of the criteria is you need to employ local labor, this percentage. So that's part of the criteria people know and they can deliver on that. So that's how we've moved towards trying to accomplish both things. Still having that focus, but making sure we're compliant with legislation.
Thank you. And perhaps a question for some of the ministry officials present on this. You know, Jason, you spoke about the bulk fuel purchases for the teacherages, and that twigged for me, hopefully remembering accurately, that the ministry was or continues to be exploring bulk purchasing options for the sector. And initially, if I recall correctly, one of the first kind of the low-hanging fruit that was explored was in fact fuel purchases, and I believe northern school divisions were exempt from that due to I think it was, am I remembering correctly, it was like fuel for buses, and you'd have to drive down to the co-op in Meadow Lake to fill up, so it just made no sense. And northern, as a consequence, northern school divisions were didn't have to participate in that bulk purchasing initiative. And again, this is highly contingent on my memory, so I'm very open to be corrected, as I'm quite confident things have evolved since then. But I do remember following that fuel purchasing agreement that a number of boards entered into, there was some pushback from local suppliers who had lost contracts with school divisions, largely, I believe, local co-ops or local suppliers who used to have those contracts. And I guess I'm wondering, perhaps to the ministry people, where that ended up, if those contracts were then returned to the local fuel suppliers for other divisions, or if that bulk purchasing of fuel has continued.
That's an excellent question, and I have some recollection of the bulk fuel purchases. I wasn't directly involved in it when that came into being in the ministry, and then of course I did go off to another ministry for a couple of years, so my recollection of this is not perfect. We're going to have to ask through text messaging to get the correct answer and get back to you on that later in our time together here this morning. But I don't know if Jason or Tom have some direct experience that they could relay.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on it as well, but I think who was awarded to for us, they didn't have a depot in every of our communities, so I think we do our own, so every year we tender out, or for maybe a 2-year period, we tender out our heating oil, our heating fuel. We do a tender, and then it's not everybody bids everywhere because not everybody serves everywhere. So that's kind of how I think was the process.
Thank you. Yeah, and I suppose the line of my questioning, I'm happy to receive clarification at a later date, is more around whether this, and of course we have to be compliant with trade agreements and on and on. But if the comments from the auditor noted specifically in section 4.1 around, Northern Lights struggling with, that desire to be compliant with those agreements, but also to support their local economies is sector-wide as opposed to specific to Northern Lights. And if there are other school divisions who also would be challenged by the the desire to support local economies through some of these larger purchases and their local small businesses, which in turn support those communities, or if this is a particular challenge to the north specifically. So again, happy to receive any clarification at a later date, but just to offer some additional context for my question.
Clarification. And I guess I would just offer, while I'm not going to speak to the specifics of the original bulk fuel purchase agreement, I would note generally that when we are in the education sector engaging in procurement opportunities like bulk fuel, if we didn't do this the first time, in future purchase requests or tenders, we certainly can put in language in that tender noting the importance of service delivery. So again, using a bulk fuel example, one of the criteria for evaluating bids could be that the provider is able to deliver the product within X number of hours of someone picking up the phone saying, I need. So that should be able to address the fact that not every bulk fuel provider is in every community. And, in that, and as a result, you could get multiple bidders that one is then able to award the contract to.
Thank you for those comments. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions from committee members at this point? Mr. Gowdy.
Yeah, sorry, it's related on in these committee meetings. So I can certainly feel for some of the situations that you've probably found yourself in over the last little while. One question that I would have more for the auditor is, there's a lot of recommendations here. Systematically, we probe into different divisions in different areas throughout the year. We don't blanket the whole province, all our divisions in each area of your audit each year, obviously. So do you know how long it's, these recommendations, there's quite a few. Have these concerns been out there for quite a while, or are they, when did they arise, these concerns?
So I guess I'll make a couple comments. So I guess from a performance audit selection standpoint, you are correct that we, to some degree, try to identify various areas of risk and then rotate around various school divisions, obviously across the province. In terms of, I think you're asking whether or not maybe a comparison here, or what we will be following up to some degree. These were reported in, I believe, 2019. So I imagine we must be following up right now in 2022 to figure out, whether or not these recommendations have been addressed and progress made. I believe, as the school division has indicated, there is a fair amount of progress we do anticipate by kind of the end of this school year. So we will then obviously do our audit work to provide an update to the committee in regards to those recommendations. If you're asking whether or not in terms of comparison, we have done potentially work in terms of purchasing in other school divisions. I would say that when we do these types of performance audits in school divisions, we always do encourage other school divisions across the province to be aware of the findings and recommendations we have made, and then to utilize the results and consider what we are finding some school divisions could do better in comparison to the processes that they do have in place. I hope that answers. If not, feel free to redirect. Yeah.
So, and for the fellows there, do you find anecdotally sometimes that with all the process and all the procedures that you have to follow, do you ever find that things can be more expensive just because some of the local community people that aren't able to jump through those hoops, or maybe they could jump through those hoops, but you know, it just seems quite onerous for them to follow the policies and procedures of maybe larger communities where the businesses are larger. Do you find that sometimes things can be more expensive having to go to larger businesses, and maybe there's less volunteerism and, you know, some of those things? That's a little bit my concern. You know, having friends up in the north at times and living in smaller communities, is some of this onerous for that community involvement? Are you concerned at all about that?
I guess to your point, it is expensive. I mean, it's just, I could go into a long-winded spiel on sort of how expensive it is to live in the north, having lived there my whole life, growing up in northern Saskatchewan, Cumberland House, for example, right? I mean, the nearest bank for us was 2 hours away. I mean, there's that whole side of it, but I think for us, we want to be in compliance. I think if the auditor is making recommendations about the organization, we want to be in compliance, and so we'll do whatever we need to do that. And sometimes it does come at I guess it's challenging for us to say we've got to be in compliance, yet our staff know the challenges that exist there to say, well, we're doing this as it comes as a price to be in compliance, but we have to. So there's just no question around that. So, and that's what we'll continue to work towards, again, to meet these timelines. But welcome you to come up to visit us in Larange, and we'll talk more.
Sorry, last question. So lots of school divisions, SSBA, have they, like obviously you're spread out over a large region and roads and travel and everything is quick. SSBA, is there supports for you within the SSBA for other divisions reaching out, you know, facing the same kinds of issues that you are, working together on that? Do you find?
We're grateful for the educational partners you know, that we have with the SSBA, with LEADS, with SASBO, with the STF. I think for us, SSBA is a great place for us to get some support. So we're grateful for that organization. Lean on them for advice on how to move forward with whatever sort of problem we're facing. So grateful for that network of individuals as well that we can sort of work with and just exchange ideas, you know, from them. So grateful for that support and for that organization for what they do for us. And I think the networking is really important. I know with, like, for example, in the LEADS organization, which I'm a part of, just being able to network with my colleagues. I can call up a director of education from, you know, Regina Public and say, hey, Greg, I'm dealing with this challenge. You know, what has your division done, right? So I think that's really important as well, to have that network that you can reach out to assist us. And Tom does the same thing. He reaches out to Saskatchewan Public School Division to say, hey, what is your administrative procedure around dealing with some of the, you know, some of these pieces on the financial side of things? And we have this AP. Well, we sort of we borrow that AP or that procedure and then just sort of again tweak that for our purposes and roll it out within our system.
Yeah. And that's what we did here. Was Saskatchewan Public had gone through a similar audit and they had a recommendation to update their purchasing policies. So we contacted them and said, do you mind if we use your policy as a baseline? And they said, yeah, for sure. Do whatever you want with it. So we do. Yeah, we do always look to other school divisions to see what they're doing and leverage that, not start from scratch.
Thank you very much for what you do.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm from a small town as well, so I can recognize some of your challenges. I mean, obviously not all. I wonder if you could maybe touch on what you do with your suppliers and your administrative staff across the school system and so on to educate them on the policy requirements that go with a lot of these recommendations and why they're important, why they're necessary, and in fact, if the policies are appropriately in place, it probably would make things quite a bit more streamlined. And that's both an education of administration, but also of your supplier chain. And I know that that's a challenge in small towns I understand that. But is there a process to reach out to the suppliers, the potential suppliers, to educate them on why you need certain things and what the requirements are?
Just start. I agree with you in terms of just making sure you've got policies and procedures in place, because it can really help your system be that much more efficient and effective. And I think in my case, I pride myself on being a good steward of the resources we have. I think that was something I was always brought up with, is to be a good steward with whatever resources you have. So I think that's something I keep in my mind as we carry out the work in the division, is always looking at that with whatever resources we have. Let's be a good steward. So I again pride myself on that and ensuring that we do that. But specific to your question, was there anything else you want to add to that, Tom?
No, I think, yeah, your point is very well. We do, once we have those policies in place, then we can point people to our policies, because they're going to be on our website. They're going to be easy for everybody to see. As far as right now, what we do with suppliers, we don't have a general process to reach out, but if suppliers contact us, then we do take the time to go through this. We can't just, I know you're local, we can't just buy from you because you're local. We have these criteria you have to meet, and you're free to compete like anybody else, but here's the criteria and how it works. So that's what we do right now, but having those policies in place will help us a lot with that.
Okay, again, in a small town, I find, probably the sophistication, certainly of the local carpenter, or in terms of some of those process things that we would typically see in a large contract, in a larger center and so on, that sort of awareness of why these things are important might not be there. So I'm wondering if is that part of your tender process? Is it part of your, do your administrators in your larger schools, for example, are they aware of these kinds of requirements so that they can communicate effectively in the early stages as to why they have to be compliant with certain things?
Yeah. Think of in one of our northern communities when we talked about the trade agreement and having to be in compliance there, and that we can't look at local suppliers. And for one, I think of it just fuel purchasing. There was a local supplier, a fuel purchaser, that would be interested in that, but just wasn't able to, and we couldn't give him award that contract to him in particular. So I think it's something we'll need to look at doing with our administrators once we've got this AP in place, to say, okay, and I think we've shared this locally with that particular situation, to say we've got to be in compliance, but not to the large audience of all our administrators. And maybe Tom has, and I just wasn't listening when he was saying that to the administrators, but I think it's something now that I'm here today and see the recommendations, and it's like, wow, okay, this is sobering. We've got to make sure that we're doing what we need to be in compliance. So there'll be some urgency on our side for sure to share that message as you're articulating. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think, we do inform our schools. Like, we did go through these recommendations when they came out with our principals, so they are somewhat aware. I would say, as far as things that have to go to a tender, the criteria are, $75,000 or $200,000 for construction. So, the bulk of our purchasing is not at that level. So, there's maybe a dozen things a year that have to go through that process, but most things are below that criteria. So, you want to get quotes from, 3 different people or 3 different companies at least. So, and our schools and our facilities guys, they know the local people. So, when those jobs come up, they definitely let them know that they're coming up, and they put in bids. They compete with everybody else. So I think in most cases they do have the capacity to compete. It's just on those bigger ones, maybe not, but for most things they do.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Just to enter in just a little bit of a comment, I really appreciate the discussion here today, and I really appreciate what was identified around concerns with around the local procurement and the aims that you'd want to have, and then the policy that's in place by way of the province. It's important to note that the auditor doesn't enter us into trade agreements or set that policy. They come in to do the accounting for whether or not entities are compliant with the trade agreement that's been established by the province. And I was really heartened to hear that you're doing work locally to look at the ways that you can ensure best value procurement for your local region and for your school division within the confines of that agreement. And you were talking about local labor. I think there was some discussion around that ability to serve locally or local service. Things like local knowledge are, things that can be factored in, is my understanding. I'm not suggesting I'm an expert in this area, but it's been an area of discussion and debate, and I'm mindful not to get into the political debate on this front, or the policy debate, I should say. But certainly other provinces have taken different approaches on this front. Community benefit agreements, as an example, out of British Columbia. Alberta has some different local preference tools that they employ as well, all within that same trade agreement. We will be consistent in entering in with a push provincially that we look at that space. But I would just urge you to continue to look at the way, to go down that route that you have been, to look at how can you build out a procurement policy that's, I guess, adherent to the agreement that the province has, but that makes sense for your region and your division. And certainly you identify very well that the division is a big economic player, big social actor in the north, but a big economic player as well. So thank you very much for your time here today. I'm told that Director Young's a pretty solid guy, super well respected as a local director, and that he could probably still hit the ice with the Ice Wolves, I'm told, and keep pace with them. So thank you for joining us here today. With respect to these recommendations, I believe I've kept track here, and I'd welcome a recommendation that we concur in note, or that we simply concur with recommendations 4 and 5. These are the ones that still have fair amount, the bulk of the work to be taken on. Would there be somebody that would move that? Mr. Gowdy, all agreed? That's carried. I'd welcome a recommendation that we concur and note progress for recommendations 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 11, 12, and 13. Is that agreed? That's agreed. That's carried. And I'd welcome a recommendation, a motion that we concur and note compliance with respect to recommendations 7, 8, 10, and 14. Moved by Deputy Chair Young, and is that agreed? All right, that's carried as well. Well, listen, thank you so very much for being with us here today, and I think it's of value for all of us to hear firsthand from you, and hear some of the distinct challenges and that your division and distinct circumstances that your division face. So thank you very much. With that, we'll move it along to Chapter 15, and I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office.
Listening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members, for listening, and thank you to the Ministry of Education. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. I will present Chapter 15 of our 2019 report, Volume 2. I'll also provide an update from the 2020 Volume 2, Chapter 18, which wasn't on the agenda. So the 2019 report, Volume 2, Chapter 15, reports the results of our annual integrated audit of the pension plan for non-teaching employees of the Saskatoon Board of Education for the year ended December 31st, 2018. We worked with the appointed auditor to carry out the audit of the pension plan. We found that the financial statements of the pension plan were reliable, the plan complied with relevant authorities, and had effective rules and procedures to safeguard public resources, other than noted in our recommendation. On page 103, we recommend the Saskatoon School Division, number 13, complete monthly reviews of the bank and investment reconciliations for the pension plan for the non-teaching employees of the Saskatoon Board of Education. From December 2017 to May 2019, the division had not carried out an independent review and approval of the bank and investment reconciliations that the plan's manager prepared. At December 31st, 2018, the plan had cash and investments totaling $131.2 million. Timely bank and investment account reconciliations check the accuracy and reliability of the plan's accounting records and can identify bank errors, if any. Without timely independent review and approval of bank and investment reconciliations, the school division risks using inaccurate financial records to make decisions and risks losing public money without timely detection. We provide an update to this recommendation in our 2020 report, Volume 2, Chapter 18, and during the 2019 fiscal year, the school division completed monthly reviews of the bank and investment reconciliations for the pension plan. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson for a brief response, and we'll get to the questions.
The Saskatoon School Division number 13 is responsible for administering the pension plan for the non-teaching employees of the Saskatoon Board of Education and responsible for paying the costs of that plan. As the auditor noted, we agree that properly administering the plan is key to providing benefits to which plan members are entitled and managing the costs of the plan. We agree with the auditor's recommendation and note that the audit, of course, was first undertaken in 2018, and are also pleased to report that beginning in June of 2019, the division implemented a monthly process whereby all reconciliations are reviewed and approved, and therefore this recommendation is considered fully implemented.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up if there's any questions. Committee members. Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you. Just two quick questions, Deputy Minister. It's noted in the auditor's report that an regular independent review is necessary, and I don't believe that word independence was captured in the status update. Should the committee understand that is? Okay.
Reviews are undertaken.
Perfect. And two last questions. Do you have any insight as to how the division documents those monthly pension plan reviews and if there is reporting out to the board?
We'll reach out to them. We do have two members from Saskatoon Public School Division with us here today. But I'm not going to put them on the spot to ask these questions because they are not the CFO. But we will reach out to their CFO, Daniel Burke, to get a confirmation of that. Typically, these reconciliations are documented and signed. In my experience, they are physically signed by the person preparing the reconciliation and physically signed by the person reviewing that reconciliation, which would be someone independent of the preparer of the reconciliation. And the typical process would be for those reconciliations, the completion of the reconciliations to in some way be reported to the board, but typically the reconciliation itself is not tabled at a board meeting, just a comment provided to the board that reconciliations are up to date.
Appreciated, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions from folks? Not seeing any, I'd welcome a motion to concur and note compliance. Mr. Scoropad moves. All agreed? That's carried. We'll move along now to Chapter 41 with respect to the Saskatoon School Division, and I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office.
Thank you. Chapter 41 of our 2020 Report Volume 2 reports the results of our third follow-up audit at the Saskatoon School Division number 13 related to its procurement processes. We made 11 recommendations in our 2014 audit, and 1 recommendation remained outstanding for this follow-up. We found that by July 2020, Saskatoon Public implemented the last outstanding recommendation. The division introduced and consistently followed processes to assess and document the validity of new suppliers. Following its established procedures related to confirming the validity of new suppliers decreases the risk of paying inappropriate or potentially fraudulent suppliers. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Very little for me to add here too. I would just also note that the school division has implemented the final recommendation, and we're pleased to see that work done.
Thank you very much. Questions? MLA or Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Weatherspoon. Question just for the auditor on this recommendation, as this is the second time we've seen this morning. I believe a similar recommendation was contained for Northern Lights as well. I'm wondering if you could just offer some comment for the education of the committee in regards to the risk and frequency of this occurrence, as it has been noted for a couple school divisions here today.
So I guess from a supplier list perspective, what we would be looking for is periodically when new suppliers are added to that list, that there is a mechanism by which you've probably got two individuals, someone's making a request, I would like to add this new supplier, and that there is some due diligence work. And so I think this school division has implemented a checklist whereby you go through and you make sure I'm not a fictitious supplier and we aren't going to just be paying money to somebody that doesn't make sense. The form or checklist is probably completed and somebody reviews and approves it. And so it is a matter of you are searching that they are a legitimate business and so forth. The other thing you periodically want to make sure you do from a supplier checklist or a supplier list perspective is just continually update and remove those suppliers that you're no longer probably utilizing and clean it up. So if we haven't bought probably goods and services from a supplier in over a year or 2 years, get a fair amount of those suppliers off. So this process also makes sure you don't end up with duplicate suppliers. So you fill out the checklist, I'm going to add a new supplier, we don't have another one that already exists.
And is there increasing prevalence of fraudulent suppliers existing within public entities?
I don't think the risks have changed necessarily with regards to supplier lists. I think that the only thing that has changed in terms of risks is sometimes with electronic approvals now. A fair amount of payments that are made to suppliers are necessarily paid through an EFT process, so it is about making sure that that process is properly set up and appropriately segregated. But I do think there is agencies, though, that to some degree they have a list of suppliers that are fairly lengthy that haven't been cleaned up in a while, and doing so just does reduce that risk of, like you said, fraudulent payments. But no, I don't think anything's changed. Or go ahead.
I would just say, I think in recent years we have seen an increase in actors out in the world requesting changes to suppliers and making those supplier change requests. So making sure that the agency is verifying that those changes are valid is an important step, so that payments aren't made to because they're electronic, as Terry mentioned, they're electronic funds transfers to someone is going to the correct person. So that type of fraud has been, I think has increased a lot in current periods, especially with electronic approvals and electronic funds transfers, because once those transfers are gone, those people have it, and it's more difficult to get that money back. So that is a risk with the supplier listing that I think is important for ensuring that those suppliers' banking information and is valid. So.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm recalling we have seen this with some municipalities in recent years, I believe, in the news. So, yeah, thank you for that. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions from others at this point? Not seeing any. I would, I've lost track of my sheet here to make sure I'm.
You just concluded consideration.
Because we don't have a new recommendation. We don't have a new recommendation here. All right, thanks for the help from all. I would welcome a motion to conclude consideration of this chapter. 41. Thank you very much, Mr. Nerline. All agreed? That's carried, and we'll move along, and I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office to focus in on Chapter 11.
Thank you. Assessing kindergarten students helps educators identify students who may be in need of professional services or additional support. Identifying issues early can help reduce future student challenges and set up students for future success. Research shows that quality education early in life leads to better health, education, and employment outcomes later in life, especially for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So Chapter 11 of our 2021 report, Volume 1, monitoring success in readying students for learning in the primary grades when exiting kindergarten, reports the results of our audit at Saskatoon Public School Division. It contains 5 new recommendations for the committee's consideration. For the period ended June 30th, 2020, Saskatoon Public School Division number 13 processes were effective to monitor its success in readying students for learning in the primary grades when exiting kindergarten, except in the areas reflected in our 5 recommendations. And I'll focus on those 5 recommendations. Our first recommendation is on page 159. We recommend Saskatoon School Division give schools and teachers written expectations about the minimum frequency of assessing kindergarten students using standard assessment tools in all key areas of learning and development. We found that Saskatoon Public did not clearly, formally communicate to schools and teachers the expected frequency for assessing the numeracy of kindergarten students. Saskatoon Public Management noted it expects teachers to assess student numeracy at least twice a year. However, we found not all kindergarten teachers were aware of and followed this expectation. Also, we found that Saskatoon Public had not communicated this expectation in writing. Clear written communication helps reduce the risk of misunderstandings and ensures tasks are completed as and when expected. Clear communication on the timing and minimum frequency for assessments of students helps reduce the risk of teachers not collecting sufficient and complete information on student learning and development in key areas. Our second recommendation is on page 160. We recommend Saskatoon School Division confirm alternative tools used to assess key areas of kindergarten students' readiness to learn, collect sufficient and relevant information. Teachers have the option of choosing alternative assessment tools to assess students. We found that Saskatoon Public does not determine whether the alternative assessment tools collect sufficient and relevant information about a kindergarten student's learning and development in the area being assessed. We found that some alternative assessment tools in use were not as robust in assessing kindergarten students as the division's standard assessment tools. Not confirming whether alternative assessment tools are sufficiently robust increases the risk of teachers not collecting sufficient information to identify all of a student's potential areas of struggle in the particular subject, which may lead to the risk teachers may not identify necessary adjustments to instruction or pursue other strategies to improve student outcomes. On page 161, we recommend Saskatoon School Division understand reasons for kindergarten students who did not participate in required reassessments of student learning and development. Saskatoon Public did not always know why kindergarten students miss participating in standard assessments. It does not expect teachers to document reasons for students not participating in these reassessments. We found that 47 kindergarten students did not participate in the early years reassessment during the 2018-19 school year, and the division management did not have a reasonable explanation for not assessing some of the students. Not having a process to know why teachers did not complete required reassessments of students increases the risk of overlooking struggling students. In addition, it increases the risk of teachers not getting sufficient information to make instructional changes to help the student succeed. Our fourth recommendation is on page 165. We recommend Saskatoon School Division provide kindergarten teachers with additional training and guidance on application of key instructional practices used to increase student readiness. We found that kindergarten teachers are not always documenting their use of sprint cycles, rationale for sprint topics, or participants. Sprint cycles are short and repeated instruction for a small group of students, usually no more than approximately 6 students, on a specific area of focus, and sprint cycles are a key strategy used by Saskatoon Public to drive adjustments to instruction and improve student outcomes. We also found principals did not always approve teachers' use of sprint cycles as expected. Consistent use of sprint cycles can help ensure this strategy effectively helps students that are close to achieving curricular outcomes and results in the most effective use of teachers' time and resources. Our last recommendation is on page 168. We recommend Saskatoon School Division analyze kindergarten assessment data to identify trends and common areas of struggle across all schools in the division. While Saskatoon Public analyzes some student assessment data centrally, its assessment was not robust and did not consider key factors relevant to learning and development of kindergarten students. For example, class sizes, participation in pre-kindergarten, or resource support allocations. Without a robust analysis of student data, Saskatoon Public may not identify the root causes for issues at certain schools or division-wide gaps. A thorough analysis of student data will also support decisions for how the division directs resources to its schools. Thank you. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you for that presentation, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson and officials from Saskatoon Public, and welcome to.
Right, thank you. First of all, I would like to introduce Michelle Howard, our Coordinator of Learning Supports from Saskatoon Public School Division, and Trish Reeve, the Superintendent of Learning from Saskatoon Public School Division. The Saskatoon Public School Division is responsible, the Saskatchewan education sector established an early learning goal associated with kindergarten students' readiness to learn. Saskatoon School Division is one of 3 divisions with more than 1,500 kindergarten students each year. As the auditor noted, for the 18-month period ended June 30th, 2020, the Saskatoon Public School Division had effective processes to monitor its success for readying students for learning in the primary grades when exiting kindergarten. However, the auditor did have the 5 recommendations as they've noted. As you will have seen in your packages in the status update, the school division has taken steps to fully implement one of those recommendations and to partially implement the remaining 4. They have plans to fully implement all recommendations by June of 2022. And with that, I'll turn it back to the committee for questions, or if there's any opening remarks that you'd like to make.
Yes, thank
you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Johnson, and thank you, Mr. Chair. We do recognize that increasing kindergarten school readiness has a significant impact on children reading at grade level by the end of grade 3, and we know that's a provincial target for us. We know that grade 3 reading levels matter and that the achievement can predict further academic success for our students as well as on-time graduation rate. Numeracy as well are critical elements for our students' readiness, and so Michelle and I actually had the opportunity last night to present our early learning accountability report to our board chair and our trustees. So this is timely in the sense that we can talk about the key initiative that we had there was to fully implement the recommendations from the audit.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work on this front. I'll open it up for questions at this time. Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you. Thank you for traveling during what must sounds like be a tight turnaround time between yesterday's board meeting and today's attendance here in the chambers. Ms. Reed, just to clarify, you said that you presented last night to the board indicating that there would be full compliance with the recommendations. That's correct? Okay. Then I have, sorry, that addresses a couple of my questions. I have, I believe, three questions. Recognizing the information I've just confirmed with you with the timelines given for the end of this school year in June, are there any challenges that you anticipate implementing some of these changes, specifically for kindergarten, obviously during COVID?
To the last one, the last recommendation, certainly on, having a centralized data collection and analyzing the data. One of the things that we have done with the new My School SASC, the student information system, is we do have an assessment and communication platform called EDSB that we've implemented with our school division, pre-kindergarten to grade 12. And EDSB is again, a place for parents to go to actually see children's learning stories, to see assessment portfolios, to be able to communicate messaging to parents, and this is where our progress reporting will occur. With the EDSB platform, because it is a third-party company that we're working with, there are EDSB analytic potential where we would be able to actually house and store system data, school-based data, where we would have as a system. And we know with working with third-party companies, sometimes their timelines aren't always matching up with ours. So we are, cautious that we may not have those analytics in place. So in terms of collecting centrally that data, we may have to do a little bit of old school type spreadsheets and sending in that type of thing, so we're able to get all of that data centrally. Right now, we currently get for kindergarten just our EYE data that comes to us from the ministry. Everything is at the school level because that's where we want our teachers to be able to respond to that data with their classrooms. So Michelle and I will be working with a subcommittee of principals as well as our Deputy Director Scrimshaw to look at how we might do this, not only for kindergarten, but we know for our grade 8 or grade 1 to 8, we will be in the same situation if the analytics aren't quite ready. So we have a plan, a secondary plan in place if the analytics are not there for teachers to actually upload the data. We may have to do that in a bit of a paper type of a way, I guess.
I would also add that a potential other challenge that we've been trying to address and face is the fact of bringing teachers together in a space to do professional learning. So we've looked to outside ways to be able to communicate with teachers. That might be in way of Canvas courses, so online professional learning opportunities, some after-school professional development, communication through email and through our administrators are also some of those ways that we're trying to access our teachers. Just with the current landscape, it's very challenging to pull 70 kindergarten teachers into a space together at the same time. So we're trying to work around those challenges as well.
Yeah, and one last one that I know is not in the document here, but I think Deputy Minister Johnson alluded to the trying times right now, and we know that we do have teacher shortages due to the pandemic. And so even if we are trying to provide some learning opportunities for our teachers, even if it's after school, we don't always have the full component of our teachers simply because many of them have to be away from the classroom for either their own needs or their family needs.
Thank you. That's an excellent segue into my second question, although I will add one here. You mentioned teacher shortages. Do you have even a ballpark figure for the staffing challenges that Saskatoon Public is, as with all divisions, struggling with?
I would say we are much more fortunate than some of our probably counterparts in the room here. We have a very healthy substitute list. So that's fantastic. The challenge becomes when our substitutes are unable to substitute because they've either been in quarantine or have family issues. We do have a plan in place that we have some of our central office coordinators and consultants are triaging and supporting on certain days. But I would say we probably in the last week or so maybe have been down 10 substitutes that we haven't been able to place. And so we work internally with our principals and they work with our coordinators and consultants, or whether it be another teacher that you know, maybe has a smaller class size that day or is an itinerant teacher that is possibly able to cover. But we've been able to manage to do that. But I know our colleagues in rural are probably finding that much more difficult.
Thank you. And my question was going to be in, you know, as we're speaking about the early years here today, I don't have the information at my fingertips, but I recall certainly during the 2020 school year, there was anticipated decline in kindergarten attendance as some parents, more parents than would be typical, elected not to send their children to kindergarten, which of course is not mandatory. And I'm curious if you can offer any comment as it would relate to kindergarten attendance rates broadly for your division, and what, if any, impact you anticipate this having on the division trends for the early years assessments.
I think that speaks to and gives it a little bit of a picture, and then maybe Michelle can speak to the kindergarten as well. In the 2020, and this is again just something we presented last night, our utilization rate for our pre-kindergarten classes in 2020-2021 was at 45% utilization, and that would have been very common across the province for all pre-kindergarten. And so when you think about 3- and 4-year-olds only attending at a 45% rate, that's going to have an effect on obviously kindergarten as well. This year we were at 74% in pre-kindergarten, so knowing that we were seeing more of our students coming and families were sending their children to school, and just over the last number of months we've had an opportunity to relocate some pre-kindergarten programs that weren't used, so our utilization rate is even higher. In terms of our kindergarten attendance, we do have an Early Learning Equal Start campaign through our foundation, the Saskatoon Public Schools Foundation, where the foundation is funding additional dollars so that we have full-day pre-kindergarten in 13 of our schools and full-day kindergarten in 14 of our schools. And so Michelle has done a great job of collecting the data for just what our kindergarten would have been last year, but we are seeing a trend of increased attendance. So,
yeah, I would agree with that as well, that the increased attendance, we do see an increase this year compared to last year for sure. And we've recorded that within our, I have the data for the full day programs for sure. I don't have for the system wide at this point. But we were in the spring of last year, we were at 78% of enrollment within our full day kindergarten programs. And we also saw a significant increase in the rest of their data in being able to attend more frequently.
the one thing I would just add to that is when you walk into a school, you would maybe as an adult and as a parent, and thinking of my children when they were younger, I can't imagine trying to put a mask on my now 23-year-old son. But these little ones, it's nothing to them. It just is just common, and they just are rolling with it, and you wouldn't know any difference. So I think just having parents know that it's really critical to have our children in person for that learning has really shifted, and we have seen a decline of our kindergarten students that would have been online last year are now returning because we do not have as many kindergarten classes that are learning from home.
Thank you very much. My last question may be better put to the ministry officials in attendance, but and pardon me, I can't remember if it was Ms. Howard or Ms. Reed, but one of you spoke to, I believe it was EDSB, in relation to, I think it was perhaps recommendation 3 from the auditor in terms of, perhaps it was recommendation 5, but regardless, I'm thinking of recommendation 3 in regards to documenting why students miss reassessments. I believe the auditor's report noted that for a small sample of, I believe, 11 students, there was some uncertainty as to why that assessment hadn't occurred. And it was noted that some of them had shifted between schools, but of course that information should follow them. And this twigged for me the Unified Student Information System, and I'm wondering, is that EDSB or is that?
That would be MSS. My School SASC.
My School SASC is what we're calling it.
Correct.
Now. Okay.
But what the is it will allow us to know when a student has transferred school divisions within the province. So one of the, the recommendations was to understand why there may not be a reassessment or why there would not be record of the early years evaluation. When the early years evaluation is done in the fall, teachers are prompted to put the report, it's a one-page report, in their cumulative file. When students move, the school division requests for the cumulative folder, and that takes some time, obviously. At least now with the new data system, we will know if a student is coming from North Battleford, if they're coming from PA, so that we have a little bit, a quicker timeline as to being able to reach out to those schools if we need to get that information or to understand why that information was not present in the cumulative folder.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time with us here today and for all you do. You're doing such important work in challenging times. I see a question here from Mr. Skoropat, and I know this will be a real good one.
Well, I can't guarantee that, but I'll do my college best. I really appreciate your comments about the importance of in-class learning. That certainly resonates with folks across the province. In particular, I want to just ask a question regarding PD and the challenges that you face in PD, and I know you identified already that it's rather challenging to get people together right now. And you've indicated some of the things you've done to try to overcome that, and certainly educating PD, administration staff and others to bring that understanding back to the school. Speaking as a former administrator, sometimes I wasn't the one to bring that, or the most knowledgeable person to bring that back to my kindergarten teachers. The expertise regarding kindergarten oftentimes lives within kindergarten and those folks. So I guess with that said, I'm wondering what role you see your LITs, your learning improvement teams, or an iteration of those playing in rolling out that the professional development within your system.
If you want to, we're very fortunate again in Saskatoon Public in that we have a number of processes in place, not only for professional learning, but for collaboration. And so in the audit report, you would have probably seen the team's capital letter that talks about our multidisciplinary support services members that are all part of a school-based team. So that would be our speech language pathologists, our psychologists, counselors, special ed consultants, and they have an opportunity to meet monthly with school-based administrators, resource teachers, classroom teachers, to really look at the needs within the school. And often these are targeted supports. And assessments, but also it is to wrap around that school team to really build capacity in areas that may be identified in a need based on the EYE or what a classroom teacher is seeing. So I'm also responsible for special education and student services, so work very collaboratively with those teams and understanding, when do we need to support in terms of language development and who's the best person to support that school team. Likely our speech language pathologist or a number of our speech language pathologists to do that work. So what's nice about that is we have those teams going into the building still. We continue to have our meetings monthly, and they're able to support either, lunch and learns or staff meetings, or to be able to say, come back to central office and say to Michelle and I, you know what, here's a need, are we able to do this centrally? and Michelle can talk about the different ways we do that. But we also, again, are very fortunate to, through the federal funding, through the ELIS, Early Learning Intensive Support, funding that we get for pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, or targeted to pre-kindergarten. We also work with our kindergarten teachers. We have a speech-language pathologist dedicated to that. Support, and she does a lot of professional development with our pre-kindergarten and kindergarten teachers, as well as Michelle's team, which I can let her speak to because she works with that team very closely to deliver not only the Canvas Online PD, which again are professional development modules that we've created in-house. They're not ones that we've gone. These are done by our team, but if you want to speak to the team under you.
Yeah, I would also add that within all of the professional learning opportunities that we're providing for our teachers, one of the fortunate things of working online and delivering PD online is that we can access more people. So not only can our kindergartens attend, but then we invite our resource room teachers and our SLPs to work alongside and get all of the information kind of all at the same time. So that's been one benefit to us, that we can have multiple groups in the same space online while we're doing our learning. So I think we've really appreciated that compared to that in person, just with a targeted one group of teachers. And yes, as Trish mentioned, that our team, I have some consultants that work alongside me as well, and they have been instrumental in developing these Canvas courses, online PD. They've videotaped some of the things that we are now have access to all teachers on our portal or in other ways that, that then they can use that information later on.
And just in closing with that, you mentioned that kindergarten teacher having that knowledge. On one of the courses that, it was not a Canvas course, but it was an invitation to attend an after-school number of modules on supporting students in writing in kindergarten to grade 12. Michelle led that, but she co-led it with other kindergarten teachers, which I think is so powerful when they're networking with their colleagues, because they're the ones in the classroom day to day and can speak to that. So.
I've got Ed's on my phone here. I've got a 7-year-old in school. As we're sitting here, I just got the third exposure message, you know, in the past week, you know, between childcare and school. These are the challenging world that all parents and school officials and teachers are navigating right now. With respect to the recommendations before us, I would welcome a recommendation to concur and note progress with respect to recommendations 2, 3, 4, and 5. We have a mover. Mr. Gowdy, all agreed? That's carried. And with respect to recommendation number 1, do we have someone that would care to move that we concur and note compliance? Mr. Friesen, all agreed? That's carried. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much to the officials from Saskatoon Public for their time with us here today and for what they bring to students throughout Saskatoon Public every day. So thank you very much. No, we'll just take a 5-minute break. I just know that this is a long haul for quite a few members around here. So roughly 5 minutes, take the time folks need to refill a coffee or get to the washroom, and we'll reconvene as soon as folks are back. Okay, we'll reconvene the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, and we'll turn our attention to Chapter 20 relating to the Northeast School Division, and I'll turn it over to our Provincial Auditor's Office.
Thank you. Early mathematics skills are shown to be a predictor of academic success in both literacy and math, and early achievement gaps tend to be sustained or widen over time. Students also use math skills in everyday life, such as purchasing goods or following a recipe. Chapter 20 of our 2019 report, Volume 2, reports the results of our audit of Chinook School Division number 211, processes to support grade 2 students in achieving grade level in math. The Provincial Education Sector Strategic Plan, or ESSP, goal at the time of our audit was that by June 2020, 80% of students would be at or above grade level in math. For the 13-month period ended December 31st, 2018, Chinook School Division number 211 had effective processes to support grade 2 students in achieving grade level in math to meet the ESSP goal of 80% by 2020. At June 2018, Chinook's results showed it had achieved its goal in that about 97% of grade 2 students were meeting or exceeding grade level in math. We found the division used plans to clearly outline expectations for math, communicated regularly with and engaged with stakeholders such as parents, other division staff, and the communities within the division, including First Nation bands, provided sufficient support to successfully deliver grade 2 math, suitably equipped teachers to teach math, consistently measured progress in math, actively evaluated student math progress, and sufficiently informed its board and public on students' progress in math. We determined no recommendations were needed. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration of the chapter.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and my apologies to the committee. I stated Northeast School Division. There's a Chapter 20 on Northeast that we'll be touching on later. Of course, this one's focused on Chinook School Division. I'll turn it over to the Deputy Minister.
Thank you, and to our members here, I'll just note that we do not have any members from or any officials from the Chinook School Division with us today. I'm also wanting to just also go on record by saying that we are pleased that during the provincial auditor's work, they found that the Chinook School Division has effective processes in place to support grade 2 students in achieving grade level in math. And noting again that the auditor did not make any recommendations related to this work. So very pleased with those results for Chinook School Division.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up if there's any questions on this chapter. Not seeing any, I'll welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 20. Moved by Mr. Nerline. All agreed? That's carried. We'll now turn our attention to Chapter 25 and of the 2019 report, Volume 2, and I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office.
Thank you. Having strong processes to support and encourage technology use in classroom instruction helps students develop essential competencies to succeed. Today's students must be fluent with digital technologies to be competitive in an ever-changing workforce as our lifestyles and workplaces embedded technology. In June 2013, the Ministry of Education published a framework that provides high-level direction for the use of technology within the Saskatchewan education system. At June 2019, the Ministry encouraged the use of technology to teach students, but does not require it. Chapter 25 of our 2019 report, Volume 2, reports the results of our audit of St. Paul's Roman Catholic Separate School Division number 20, processes to adapt technology for learning in elementary schools. For the 16-month period ended June 30th, 2019, St. Paul's processes were effective to adapt technology for learning in elementary schools, other than the areas addressed in our 6 recommendations. And I'll focus on those 6 recommendations. The first recommendation can be found on page 231. We recommend St. Paul's Roman Catholic Separate School Division number 20 periodically determine the extent it integrated technology use in its elementary school's classroom instruction. The division does not have a clear picture of the current instructional use of technology in its elementary classrooms. As a result, it did not know whether it is making progress in integrating the use of technology into classrooms. Having an understanding of the current level of integration of technology use in the classrooms by grade and by school would provide a reference point for assessing whether the division is making progress in improving technology integration. It would also assist in determining the desired level of integration and determine how long the division would need to achieve the desired level. This leads to the second recommendation. The second recommendation is also on 231. We recommend St. Paul's determine the extent it wants to integrate technology use in its elementary schools' classrooms instruction and by when. The third recommendation can be found on page 232. We recommend St. Paul's communicate its future vision of integrating technology in the classrooms to its teachers. As the division has not determined to what extent or how fast it would like elementary teachers to integrate the use of technology into classrooms, teachers remain unclear as to what extent and how fast they are expected to do so. Good practice directs that knowing how far and by when helps an organization more optimally direct its resources. Not determining this current state or desired future state of technology use in schools means the division cannot reasonably assess whether its current actions are sufficient and appropriate, and not establishing and communicating a clear vision may make engaging teachers in meaningful use of technology in classrooms difficult. The fourth recommendation can be found on page 233. We recommend St. Paul's Roman Catholic Separate School Division number 20 periodically verify the existence and location of educational technology devices available in its elementary schools. The division did not periodically confirm devices assigned to schools continue to exist. St. Paul's assigned over 9,000 devices for student use in classrooms. The division used a master list of devices that tracks device type and location. However, the division did not periodically determine whether devices on the master list continue to be at the assigned location or elsewhere, disposed of, or lost. We also found significant differences between the master list and school device listings. Not periodically verifying the accuracy of its master list for devices increases the risk the division will not detect missing devices or no location of devices. This could result in devices being unavailable for teachers and students to use in the classroom. The fifth recommendation can be found on page 234. We recommend St. Paul's periodically assess the cost-benefit of its decision for using differing device brands and IT platforms for classroom use in its elementary schools. The division updates education technology devices provided to schools on a 4-year rotational cycle by allocating budget to purchase devices to schools. The educational technology team gives schools allocated budgets to purchase devices, a list of various devices, and prices to guide decisions on what devices to buy for classroom use. We found the list included about 35 different devices from different brands operating on different platforms. The education technology team noted that this approach allows students to benefit from exposure to different device brands and platforms, but the division had not analyzed the cost benefit of taking this approach. Using a multiple brand and IT platform approach could lead to reduced buying power, as there is less opportunity to negotiate for volume discounts. It also increases the cost and time for IT support and staff training, and may require additional support for teachers moving between schools to use different devices effectively. As a result, not formally analyzing the cost benefit of its decisions to purchase and support multiple brands of devices using different platforms increases the risk of the division not using resources efficiently. The sixth and last recommendation can be found on page 236. We recommend St. Paul's better link technology purchasing decisions to its education technology plan or equivalent documents. In 2018, the division developed a forum to help school administrators engage with teachers on technology purchase decisions and guide educational technology team discussion with school administrators about technology purchases and use. The forum helps gather information on where the school is currently, where it hopes to go, and how the division can help provide that support. However, we found the forum does not provide a clear link to the division's educational IT plan or its technology integration matrix. In addition, at June 2019, we found the form had only been used once, and in this case was largely incomplete. Not assessing whether individual technology purchases supports the technology goals of the division through the technology integration matrix increases the risk that limited resources are not used to their full potential. Effectively using assessment information from schools when purchasing technology would provide the division with valuable information about where schools are at in technology integration. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration of the 6 new recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson, as well as leadership from Greater Saskatoon's Catholic that are here today to respond.
All right, thank you. And I would like to welcome and introduce Joel Lloyd. Joel is the Chief Financial Officer for St. Paul's Roman Catholic Separate School Division, and Mark Gobet. Mark is the Coordinator of Educational Technology for the School Division. So with respect to this chapter, the School Division set a vision to adapt technology to enrich learning and promote excellence in education. The auditor provided 6 recommendations regarding the effectiveness of processes to adapt technology for learning in elementary schools. The ministry agrees with the auditor's recommendations that it's important for school divisions to implement effective processes to ensure the effective use of technology in elementary schools. And as noted in the status update, the school division has taken steps to fully implement one of the recommendations and partially implement the remaining 5 recommendations. All recommendations are planned to be fully implemented by June of this year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joel to offer a few more comments.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Johnson, and thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. With these recommendations, we are again planning to implement those by the end of the fiscal year or the school year as well. I think with technology, it's one of those items that is not a requirement by any means. It's encouragement that we would have with our staff. We all know it's important. As mentioned earlier in the proceedings, an online option is kind of our new world now with meeting with our staff and other school divisions. When it comes to technology, though, we do know it's important in our schools, and we provide those resources to our schools. But we have delegated a lot of that decision-making to the school level, and the school will look at their staff, the skill set on their staff. They will look at the student demographic, and we've allowed some flexibility within our schools to choose the technology and the equipment that best suits the needs of their school. And we've delegated that. So we've decentralized a lot of that decision-making down to the school level. And as the recommendations mentioned, we can do a better job of collecting that information and seeing how that's working at each of the schools that we've implemented that. We continually make investments in our technology at the school level. As referenced, we have a rotating refresh of technology every 4 years. Schools have the opportunity to buy a new equipment to a certain extent for their student body based on a number of conversations with our ET staff as well as with our school community councils. And we do thank all of our staff for their contributions, as well as our school community councils. They do also fundraise and support those efforts from time to time as well. I'll turn it over to Mark if you have any other comments.
Yeah, I think throughout some of the line of questioning, you might find that we have taken many of these considerations into account, even though the last few months have been a challenge for us in the educational technology sector, but we certainly have made significant progress. And I think we're well on our way of completing these by the end of the current school year. So happy to talk about our progress.
Right on. Well, thank you so very much for the work and your presence here today and all your leadership and efforts for students in your division. I'll open it up to members for questions. Ms. Young, Regina University.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you both for being in attendance here today. It is important and we appreciate it. My question specifically to start would be asking you just generally to expand upon the first recommendation, as it seems somewhat foundational to understand the rest of them, and understanding that you've said work is ongoing and you anticipate these recommendations being implemented by, I believe you said June 2022. But if you could perhaps offer some comment on what the committee can expect through the implementation process.
Start with the response. Historically, what we've done is, again, when every 4 years when those schools would get refreshed, we would meet with the staff and determine how they've integrated technology into their classroom and within their school. With this recommendation, what we're looking at doing is doing more of a mass survey. So we would survey all staff to determine what the extent of technology is. The pandemic has offered us many challenges, but also some opportunities to look at some online options, and our teaching staff now have done tremendous work in incorporating a virtual option, if ever need be, within their classroom. So they've been given the tools and resources. They've supported the development of those courses as well. So we fully anticipate when we do a survey across the entire school division, the results will show that quite a bit of integration of technology now in our classrooms due to that. So,
yeah, just to kind of build upon what's been discussed, we had actually developed a plan and procedure to go out into classrooms, develop tools on iPads to survey students to get direct feedback on their experiences. That was slated to take place in May of 2020. But as a result, we were able to shift that survey into a much larger survey that identified all of our stakeholders, so directly with our parents, our staff, and our students. And so we used that to actually inform our decisions for both the blended and online learning guides. So in a sense, we had a plan for garnering support in one area, but we've actually been able to expand it to gain significantly more insights into all of the possibilities.
Thank you. And for the two subsequent recommendations, which I note in the update are identified as implemented, but it also seems to imply, given the timeline noted, that it is a bit of an iterative process. It is ongoing. Is that accurate?
As with Saskatoon Public, we've also implemented EDSB as a learning management system in combination with our student information system of My School Sask. So we have been working together with a planning committee at our division level for the implementation of EDSB for the last 3 years. Last year, and with March of 2020, our foundational shift was bringing all teachers up to speed with educational technology. So one of the recommendations that we fully implemented would be establishing a base of educational technology use among all educators, which would be that any educator might be able to move online should the opportunity present itself through our current situation. After that, we were able to follow up with that and provide additional training in the form of resource hubs, we call them, online websites. We created a YouTube channel that I think we're at over 70,000 views with over 3,000 hours of PD consumed by our folks. So we've certainly been able to see different opportunities created as well as new opportunities for analytics to determine how effective those are in our implementation.
Thank you. And one final question. You spoke about the decentralized nature of the distribution of technology across your system, and the decision that you've made as a school division to supply or support as best meets the needs of those individual classrooms. And I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on that, the implications certainly for that digital literacy that you've spoken about for staff, as well as access to technology and any consequences that it would be having for your school budgets or as a division.
One of the recommendations is to conduct a cost-benefit analysis of having different types of devices within the school, and we have, again, given that flexibility to schools to select if they want Chromebooks over computers or maybe they want iPads. Again, it's really dependent on the school and what their priorities are. Part of a cost benefit for us wouldn't be just cost. Obviously, it would be probably less expensive to have all the same device throughout the entire system. But then you also lose the ability for students to experience different operating systems and different types of equipment. So when we do a cost-benefit analysis, there'll be more emphasis on the benefit and the value that would have on those devices. And we're not aware of too many of those types of analyses that have been conducted so far, so we are looking forward to doing that and showing the support that we would have for those types of devices. So that's ongoing, and we do plan to do that in the next a little while here, but we also want to prioritize the ability to have our students experience different types of softwares and types of equipment.
Absolutely. And noted in the recommendation, initially we had, during the refresh process, a school would be essentially given kind of a shopping list, different technology we have used in the division as well as estimated costs. And I think the number was noted at about 35 different items. What we have since done is we have reviewed that list and we've now pared it down to roughly 3. Generally, it would be kind of your Chromebooks, your iPads, and kind of desktop or laptop-ish type models. And even though we say we've decentralized it in that we're not necessarily just specifically allocating a set amount per school, we actually have myself and as well as some other consultants that are able to work with the school and find out what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve, what do they already have in place already, and we establish kind of what we think might be the best model and make sure that it's similar to models in other schools, especially where we've seen success. So as Joel mentioned, one device might make everything much easier, but we could all imagine that an iPad might be great for a specific set of years, but may not be perfect for a grade 12 classroom. So it is definitely a balanced approach and finding out what is the best tool to complete that task in any given scenario. And we have many different diverse needs across our large division that some are contextual based on programming.
And last question for me, when you speak about working with individual schools to kind of identify what success looks like for them through the purchasing and use of technology, how do you evaluate that?
Yeah, so first, we have a 4-year rotation with roughly 13 schools, and so that rotation is made aware to all those school individuals, and we usually try to start that process in May for the next upcoming year. We invite the school administrators, and we have ET facilitators or educational technology facilitators who's typically an educational leader within the school to a meeting where we usually present some of the pedagogy, some of the thought processes behind why you might want to go one versus the other, as opposed to maybe just trying to buy as many devices as you can for the amount of students. So what that process looks like is we start with initial conversations. We don't even talk about costs or devices. We primarily start with the pedagogy. What is it that you want to achieve? We also then work with our IT groups to find out exactly what is in that building as far as current technology. Are there any concerns, things they found work well versus not work well? Moving into the next school year, we'll find that our budgets are finalized and we have the exact amount approved, and then we could then work with the school on a one-on-one basis. So it's very much a effort between educational technologists and the school providing support one-on-one. We try to focus our support on those schools as opposed to being able to offer something for all 50 schools. We really try to heavily focus our work on those 13 schools per year. That being said, we've never said no to a request, so it's not like we only focus on those schools. So we're lucky in that regard to have a lot of tremendous support.
Just maybe to expand on that, to your question, Ms. Young, around what success look like. Part of those conversations would be, you had a plan to use the technology for a certain purpose. How have you utilized that in the school? And there'll be ongoing conversations to ensure they're utilizing it based on that plan. And if they're not able to, for whatever reason, we provide resources, training, to ensure that that's happening in our schools as well.
Thank you. No further questions.
Deputy Chair Young.
Yeah. Ms. Young asked a couple of these questions, and this is sort of a bit of a follow-up to her last one. When you obviously have a 4-year cycle, you have a tech budget in place, but you are, because you are putting the decisions down at the school-based level and allowing them to choose between 3 different technologies. When you collect data on student success, whether it's through reading, math levels, whatever it is, do you see disparity amongst the schools that are choosing not to use as much tech as others that are? Because this boils down to student success and what that means across the division and particularly in these elementary schools.
What I can tell you, anecdotally from the records we collect, there's no study that we were aware of that definitively says a piece of technology will make this student exponentially have a better experience. And that's why we don't necessarily mandate the use of technology, because we know that many of our teachers are fantastic teachers and the technology is a tool. So we recognize the importance of the tool and we will provide as much support as possible, but we don't necessarily say you must use this tool. There are certain contexts now, obviously, with the online use where we make sure they're prepared, but we fully plan on working with the schools and the individuals to find out what works best for their scenario, what is success for them. And for one of our schools, that success criteria might be slightly different than the other. So we're very much not necessarily where we say decentralized, it's very much a personal one-on-one conversation with the schools and our consultative teams to facilitate that learning.
And a second question is regards to, because you are using different technology and different licensing, have you seen an increase to your tech budget necessarily because of the different devices you're using and the upgrades you have to do on a regular basis to this, and also to connectivity possibly for different devices?
Try to answer that question. There's a few different ones in there. For us, we are seeing increasing costs in software just across the board. There's definitely a movement towards annual licensing, where we used to buy the old 1995 Microsoft Word. You'd have it for 10 years and you would pay nothing after the first year. Everything now has moved to annual type licensing, so we're seeing significant increases in all of our platforms for that. We are trying to minimize that as much as possible. MSS, My School SAS, we're able to utilize that. You heard EDSB is also able to collapse a few other software platforms into one. So we are attempting to do that. We're working with other school divisions to try to reduce our software costs by mass procuring those types of software platforms they want to do. So we are seeing increasing costs for sure. Obviously, regarding budgets, our funding is unconditional. We're able to allocate it, and we are a lot of times with our technology budget looking at our core infrastructure first, ensuring that we have the backups happening, that we have the connectivity available to students. Would we want to expand that? Of course, as we look at technology nowadays and every person has a portable device, the ability to connect would be something that we were working towards. But what we haven't necessarily done is a cost-benefit analysis on individual devices. And I think to your question around, is it better to buy an Apple computer compared to a PC? Does one last longer or not? That's the work that we're planning to do here the next year to be able to determine what's the benefit and what's the cost. And if it is more cost, is the benefit there? And we haven't collected that information yet, but we plan to do that in the next 12 months.
Any other questions from folks at this time? Not seeing any, I'd welcome a motion with respect to recommendations 1, 4, 5, and 6 that we concur and note progress. Deputy Chair Young, is that agreed? That's carried. And with respect to 2 and 3, would someone care to move that we concur and note compliance? Mr. Scoropad, is that agreed? Agreed. All right, that's carried as well. We'll move along now to chapter again, that's with respect to Greater Saskatoon Catholic, and shift over to the provincial auditors to present on chapter 30.
Thank you. Chapter 30 of our 2021 report, Volume 1, reports the results of our second follow-up audit at St. Paul's Roman Catholic Separate School Division number 20, related to processes to promote good student health and physical fitness. We made 5 recommendations in our 2015 audit, and only 1 recommendation remained outstanding. We found that at March 2021, the division had not implemented the 1 outstanding recommendation, as it was not following its nutrition policy and limiting the availability of non-healthy food choices it sells and or serves to students. While St. Paul's has implemented centralized purchasing for schools and standard menus for use in high school cafeterias, and its standard menus have healthy choices for students, not all schools were following the standard menus and were providing vending machines with items on the nutritional policy's restricted list, for example, carbonated drinks. Schools not following its nutrition policy for provision of unhealthy food choices puts St. Paul's at risk. It will not meet its strategic goal of increasing health and fitness of its students. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thanks for the presentation. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson and leadership of Greater Saskatoon Catholic.
All right, thank you. Again, we are pleased that the auditor has noted in their follow-up audit on this topic that the school division has generally improved its processes to promote good student health and physical fitness. We recognize that students who are physically active and properly nourished are better learners. The auditor found that one recommendation remains partially implemented. As noted in the status update provided to you, since that follow-up audit was completed, the school division has taken steps to implement the remaining recommendation and plans to have it fully implemented by the end of the current school year. So with that, I will turn it over to Joel.
Thank you, Deputy Mr. Johnson. Last school year, at the end of last school year, we did constitute really a school division broad committee consisting of members from different labor groups, from nutrition workers to school administration to division office staff, and looked at our policy. Our policy was dated 2012, so it was due for an update, and then this work allowed us to really align that with provincial guidelines, which we've done. Update it based on product changes as we've seen new products enter into the market. We made those changes. The board approved the new policy last June, and we've communicated those changes to our staff this last September. And with the vending machines, we do contract that service out. So that poses a couple challenges. One is our vendors are profit-driven vendors, so they're looking at putting products in our machines that will drive up sales. But obviously we want to ensure compliance with our nutrition policy. So we've also enacted a monitoring system to ensure that our vendors are following our policy, which was communicated to them during this audit as well. Pause there if there's any other questions.
Thanks so much. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Young, Jana University.
Thank you. Just one quick question from me. I note the physical fitness initiatives portion of the recommendation isn't included in the status update. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a bit further.
So we've updated a number of pieces within this audit. So there was obviously the nutrition part, which is around our nutrition policy that we've updated. There was also physical education guidelines, and we updated those procedures and policies as well to reflect provincial guidelines around extra time. We've updated our extracurricular groups as well as those activities that we approve and those that we would shy away from. Those have all been communicated out to our schools and the staff, and those have been updated. So we've implemented those prior to this audit occurring.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chapter 30. The outstanding recommendation has been implemented. Thanks so much for the work and attention on it. I would welcome a motion to conclude considerations of Chapter 30. Do we have a mover? Mr. Friesen, all agreed? That's carried. Talking about a good lunch, don't hesitate to stop down to the legislative cafeteria before you find your way back to Saskatoon. Linda down there, she'll treat you well. And thank you so much for your time and attention here today. Okay, I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office to focus on Chapter 8 as it relates to the Horizon School Division.
Thank you. Having effective maintenance processes helps ensure facilities can perform at optimum levels over their expected service life, reduces the risk of service disruption, and identifies and reduces risk associated with aging facilities. The consequences of not carrying out effective maintenance and repairs on facilities includes potential health and safety problems for users of the facilities, which includes school staff and students, reduced quality of space, higher future repair costs, and facilities needing to be replaced earlier than intended. Chapter 8 of our 2020 report, Volume 1, reports the results of our audit of Horizon School Division number 205's processes to maintain its facilities. For the 12-month period ended September 30, 2019, Horizon School Division number 205 processes were effective to maintain its facilities other than the areas identified in our 5 recommendations. My presentation will focus on those 5 recommendations. On page 92, we recommend Horizon School Division prioritize all identified maintenance deficiencies associated with fire protection, suppression systems, and boilers to enable determination of the nature and timing of necessary maintenance. Horizon School Division does not always formally track and prioritize identified deficiencies and the recommended maintenance for fire protection and suppression systems and boilers. Rather, it relied on a small number of staff involved in maintenance decisions to informally prioritize and address the deficiencies. In our audit, we found staff did not address all significant identified deficiencies within an appropriate time frame. For example, as of September 2019, our review of year-old third-party inspection reports of fire sprinkler and alarm systems found the division had not repaired 7 sprinkler systems and 19 fire alarm systems with identified deficiencies. As a result of these deficiencies, the facilities did not comply with the provincial fire code, resulting in expired inspection certificates for 23 facilities. Prioritizing identified maintenance deficiencies can help the division avoid non-compliance with applicable codes and provide safe environments for all students and staff. The second recommendation is also on page 92. We recommend Horizon develop a strategy to better use the maintenance IT system to plan, track, and monitor maintenance of its facilities and significant components. The division did not update condition and replacement year information in the asset planning module based on the results of its annual or periodic inspections of significant components, such as roofs, heating systems, and boilers, or completed maintenance activities. The division also did not use the preventative maintenance module to track its preventative maintenance requirements and activities for several significant components where it uses third-party contractors to carry out the maintenance activities, such as the fire protection and suppression systems, boilers, and roofs. So tracking key information for almost all significant components in the maintenance IT system would enhance the division's ability to plan, track, and monitor the maintenance of its facilities and components. It would also enable the division to use the system to monitor changes in FCI, Facility Condition Index, and deferred maintenance to help determine whether it is doing the right maintenance at the right time. Our third recommendation on page 97, we recommend staff of Horizon School Division maintain up-to-date and accurate information in the maintenance IT system about completion of assigned maintenance activities. The division expects staff to complete assigned maintenance based on priority or a stated time frame and document the completion of maintenance in the appropriate module of the maintenance IT system. We tested service requests and preventative maintenance requests and found several instances where requests were not completed promptly, were not completed at all, or completed maintenance items were not closed promptly. Not documented completed maintenance promptly leads to overstating the number of uncompleted service requests assigned to staff, and outdated information impacts the expected priority of service requests, which can lead to ineffectiveness of maintenance staff. Documenting the completion of maintenance items or reasons as to why maintenance was not done gives management key information to enable monitoring of the maintenance staff performance. Our fourth recommendation can be found on page 98. We recommend Horizon actively monitor the timeliness of completion of requested and expected maintenance. Horizon did not actively monitor the timeliness of completion of requested and expected maintenance or the accuracy of information tracked in the maintenance IT system. Without effective monitoring of the timeliness of maintenance activities, there is increased risk of maintenance not being completed as expected, which can result in further deficiencies with the division's facilities or significant components. Our fifth and final recommendation can be found on page 99. We recommend Horizon provide its board with periodic, comprehensive maintenance reports about the results of its maintenance activities, including facilities condition, deferred maintenance, and anticipated impact to inform decision-making. Management gives the board monthly reports on its maintenance activities, but its reports did not provide sufficient information about whether its activities are maintaining its facilities and their significant components so that they can operate in a satisfactory manner. We found reports did not include information on planned versus actual maintenance costs or project status and schedules. Reports also did not include information about year-over-year trends in the Facility Condition Index, or FCI, or deferred maintenance on an overall basis, or by school basis. Reports should highlight facilities with higher maintenance concerns. The FCI and estimate of deferred maintenance show whether maintenance activities are achieving the desired result and whether the division is doing the right maintenance at the right time. The maintenance IT system automatically determines this index based on deferred maintenance in the system. Without sufficient analysis and reporting of maintenance results, the board cannot assess whether the division effectively maintains its facilities and components or whether maintenance funding is sufficient and efficiently used. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration of the 5 new recommendations.
Thank you very much for the focus of the work. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson for brief remarks. I want to thank the Horizon School Division for what's a substantial and detailed update here on the status update. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Johnson.
Thank you. And with this chapter for Horizon School Division, again, I will note that we do not have officials present with us today, but they are watching us on live stream. So if there are particular questions that I'm not able to respond to, Kevin Geringer, the Director of Education for Horizon School Division, and his other officials will be available to us. And what I would like to note is that Horizon School Division is responsible for maintaining 38 schools and 4 other facilities located across East Central Saskatchewan. This chapter, which provided observations from the year 2020, summarized the audit results of the effectiveness of the processes used by Horizon School Division at that time to maintain its facilities. The auditor concluded for the 12-month period ended September 30th, 2019, that the school division had effective processes to maintain its facilities. However, there were 5 recommendations, as they have just outlined. And what I would note, and I guess reiterate the chair's comment, that in the status update document that's been provided to you, the school division has taken significant steps to implement 4 of the 5 recommendations and has partially implemented the remaining recommendation. Now, I have also a note here from Kevin Geringer. If it's all right, I'll read part of it. And he has noted for us that, again, like the ministry, they value the provincial auditor's report as they continue their journey moving from good to great. We always want to get better, and this report identified some areas where they are having opportunities to improve. They've noted compliance on all of the recommendations except one, and of course we can talk about that further. But they do expect that when the auditor is able to return for the follow-up audit, that they will be able to demonstrate compliance with that final recommendation. And one of the areas that Kevin has noted that he'd like to speak a bit to is the area of fire monitoring. Of course, that was one of the recommendations. And he notes that the auditor's report indicates that they had deficiencies in the fire alarm monitoring. What he wanted to highlight is that all schools always had operating fire monitoring systems, and all systems worked. They have now fixed all of the deficiencies, including the 7 sprinkler systems, 2 of which had some implementation problems with that fix, but that has been corrected. 19 deficiencies included the things such as code issues related to bulbs needing to be removed on indicator systems and non-locatable devices in some areas such as ductwork or crawl spaces. And they have undertaken the work necessary in order to either remove or relocate those devices. So they're, again, very pleased for the auditor's report. It has enabled them to improve their operations. They're also noting that they are very appreciative of the ministry's support for the stimulus funding for emergency and exit light upgrades in all of their schools, and that they have almost completed moving all schools to LED lighting, including the emergency lighting upgrades. So very thankful for the $1.8 million that they received through the stimulus funding. And I will end my comments there and see if there are questions.
Thank you for that report. Thank you for the report from Director Geringer and the team that's tuning in here today as well, and for the work on these fronts. I'll open it up if there's any questions from members. Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Minister, perhaps I'll start with a question that I anticipate may have to go to Kevin and his team, and then perhaps proceed with one that I believe you and your officials could answer. So my question, likely for Horizon, is some clarification around the notes from the auditor in regards to the fire protection suppression system. I did listen closely to the update provided by Director Geringer, and I'm just trying to understand, so perhaps looking for a little more clarification on what he's noted in his update and what is noted in the auditor's report, which recognizing I think it's 23 of the 38 or 43 schools operated by Horizon had expired inspection certificates for the facilities, and 7 had sprinkler systems in need of repair, and 19 had fire alarm systems with identified deficiencies. Does this mean Does this mean that 7 schools were operating for some period of time without fully functional sprinkler systems?
I know Kevin is watching and he's caught your question, so as soon as I get the answer from him, I will relay that.
My higher level question relates to figure 6 on page 95 in the auditor's report, where it discusses that Horizon has not in recent years spent the totality of its budget each year, and I'm wondering, is this that perennial issue with school divisions where there's that conflict between the calendar year, the fiscal year, and the school year in terms of how spending rolls out, or is the committee to understand that the dollars just simply were not spent by any of those ways in which we classify a year within education?
Thank you for the question, and that one I know I can answer. So with respect to the information in figure 6, what you are seeing there is the result of a number of issues. You identified one of them, and that is the timing difference that we have with the differences between school divisions. Well, the timing, I'll call it a timing difference. Tara might correct me on the use of that particular phrase, but we, in our process, we provide the preventative maintenance and renewal grants to school divisions in June, and the school division's year end is August, and so obviously that gives them roughly 3 months to make use of those funds, which oftentimes means that they're putting them in reserve and drawing them out of reserve the following year when they are undertaking whichever work that they are planning on. So that's one of the reasons for the differences between budget and actual. Other differences really are just dealing with the fact that sometimes school divisions will purposely accumulate the PMR funds in reserves so that they can have a larger sum to do a larger project in a future year. And sometimes they have plans to do projects, and through the tendering process or what have you, other circumstances come into play that result in a delay in those projects proceeding on schedule. So sometimes it's just project delays that result in those differences between budget and actual.
Thank you for that. So just to be fully clear on this, the committee can understand that those dollars do in fact get spent on PMR or on facility projects then.
Indeed, the funding that's provided to school divisions for PMR is conditional. You heard Joel mention earlier that the operating grant that's provided to them is largely unconditional, but the PMR grant is required to be spent on maintenance and repairs in the school division.
Thank you. My next two questions are somewhat related, and these may be better put to Director Geringer, or you or your officials may be able to answer them. In regards to the implementation of these recommendations, are you able to offer comment on whether the implementation of these recommendations will have short-term and long-term implications on the facility condition index for Horizon, and what, if yes, what that is anticipated to be?
Will the implementation of the recommendations have an impact on FCI? Yeah, I think it will, particularly when we look at the recommendations requiring the school division to make use of the, I think the generic term is the maintenance IT system. The name we call it in the school division and in the ministry is Asset Planner. That's the name of the product. So if they make full and regular use of Asset Planner and enter data into that database on a regular basis, it will help them better track facility condition index information, and that ultimately will have an impact on reported FCI for the division.
Thank you. And in regards to Asset Planner, thinking in particular of recommendation number 2, better using that IT system and then undertaking like the tagging and the barcoding that accompanies that, do the costs associated with recommendation 2, would those come from PMR funding typically?
Yes, I believe they would. And, you know, I'll also throw in a comment related to the tagging of assets under PMR. The choice to tag an asset is in itself something that needs to have a bit of a cost-benefit analysis. There will be assets in a school facility that when you look at the long term, and you think, well, should I put a tag on that asset or not? What benefit will there be to doing that? School divisions will need to take a look at that and say, well, do I really need to tag that asset? Because every time you tag another thing, then that's data that needs to be monitored and collected and analyzed. So there is a bit of an art, a bit of a science involved in determining which assets are worth tagging and including in the Asset Planner system.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, do you need me for anything?
Nope, you proceed.
Yeah. Perhaps 2 other broad questions while we wait for the answer to the first, and then I can move on. Obviously, any mention of fire suppression systems in schools is cause for concern. Of course, not having the scope or understanding of the severity of those deficiencies that have been identified there. I'm curious if you can offer comment as to what the situation may be like across the sector more broadly, obviously with 27 school divisions ranging in size and, for lack of a better term, in scope. I guess I'm looking for any comment from the ministry on whether this audit and its findings have prompted further communication or follow-up with divisions more broadly in regards to the up-to-date nature of sprinklers and fire alarm systems, as well as inspection certificates, or whether the committee can conclude that perhaps this is an outlier as opposed to more of an indication of something more systemic.
I do not have any information available to me right now to be able to accurately respond to that question. So I apologize. I don't know.
Perfectly okay. My last comment or my last question or comment is, I believe last year at, forgive me, I can't recall if it was our winter or spring meeting of public accounts, but it was with former Auditor Ferguson. There was a conversation, I believe, with Assistant Deputy Minister Jensen about this committee's ability to see facility indexes and FCI, and I believe at that time he had indicated that that was not possible, and both the former auditor and myself thought, although we didn't follow up, that it had been provided before. And I just note that I do see here for Horizon, their FCI index has been provided, so I would just perhaps follow up on that and just put that request back to the ministry from last year if that could be provided.
Thank you for that reminder. And I believe we were addressing that question through Freedom of Information request as well. So I believe it will be responded to shortly.
Aware of that, how embarrassing. Thank you. Mr. Chair, no further questions.
Response from Kevin related to your first question. And what he is saying is that most of our schools had deficiencies in some sprinkler areas, but not throughout the school. So there was no school that was completely without sprinkler systems. He goes on to say that we were getting this fixed, but the problem was that some of the components needed to be replaced every 5 years in order to get certified. We needed to upgrade, so it's not that they weren't functioning, but the pieces of equipment needed to be replaced. Oh, that's a bit of a repeat, sorry. So they again reiterate that the systems were functional in most sections of the schools. He goes on to say that they have been replaced, but there was a pump that was not working and the pump was on order, hence the deficiency. So that has been addressed. He says we are now up to code as we brought in outside agencies to help them come into compliance. The fire monitoring systems were operational. The suppression side was working in most cases, but there were a few where they were in the process of fixing them. So that is what I have from Kevin on that question.
The staff at Horizon.
Thanks so much. Any other questions from committee members? I'd welcome a motion with respect to recommendation 2 that we concur and note progress. Moved by Mr. Kirsch. All agreed? That's carried. With respect to recommendations 1, 3, 4, and 5, I welcome a recommendation that we concur and note compliance. Deputy Chair Young moves. All agreed? That's carried. We'll now turn our attention to Chapter 20. I know the member from Melford will have particular interest in this one. It's the Northeast School Division.
Thank you. Chapter 20 of our 2020 report, Volume 1, reports the results of our second follow-up audit of Northeast School Division's processes to increase the percentage of grade 3 students reading at grade level. We made 5 recommendations in our 2016 audit. 1 recommendation remained outstanding. We found that by March 2020, Northeast had implemented the 1 outstanding recommendation. Since May 2018, the division appropriately requires that schools use a single tool to assess grade 3 student reading levels. Northeast previously evaluated the effectiveness of the tool. Focused assessments and monitoring of grade 3 reading levels helps Northeast efficiently identify students who need additional support or resources. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thanks so much for the follow-up on this recommendation that we've already concurred as a table with, and I see that it's been implemented. Quick comment from the Deputy Minister. That
wouldn't just be repetitive of what the auditor has already said, so.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? All right. We've already voted on this, already passed a motion on this front, so I would welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 20 relating to Northeast School Division. Mr. Nerline moves. All agreed? All right, that's carried. Of course, thank you to all the good folks at Northeast School Division for their work on this front and many others. We'll flip it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office and turn our attention to the Prairie Valley School Division with respect to Chapter 21.
Chapter 21 of our 2020 Report Volume 1 reports the results of our first follow-up audit of Prairie Valley School Division's processes to monitor home-based education programs. In our 2018 report, we concluded the school division did not have effective processes and made 8 recommendations for improvement. By January 2020, we found the division significantly improved its processes and addressed all the outstanding recommendations. The division revised its forms and templates to help educators provide all required information for their home-based education programs. It effectively registered home-based education programs and assessed the education plans and annual progress reports provided by home-based educators. Following its assessments, the division consistently gave educators timely feedback on learners' annual progress reports. As well, to encourage educators to comply with home-based education documentation requirements, the division implemented a practice of reimbursing educators for eligible expenses only after it received and assessed learners' annual progress reports. Effective monitoring of home-based education programs helps ensure they assist home-based learners in making sufficient educational progress for their age and ability and provide them with a quality education. I'll pause now for the committee's questions.
Thanks so much. These recommendations have already been considered by this table as well and have been concurred in. We see implementation by Prairie Valley, and we thank them for those efforts. Any comments, Deputy Minister, on this front?
So offer my thanks to Prairie Valley School Division, and the Director of Education there is Luc Lermino. So I would thank him and his team for their excellent work in addressing all 8 of those recommendations.
Certainly appropriate recognition to Director Lermino and the team. Any other Deputy or MLA, Ms. Young, Regina University.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you're promoting or demoting me with that, but just one question, contextualizing this, obviously coming from 2018 and now obviously in the situation of COVID-19, this report notes, I think at the time there were 180 home-based learners in Prairie Valley, and I'm just taking this as an opportunity to inquire about any trends that the sector may be seeing in regards to home-based learning. Earlier, I believe the representatives from Saskatoon Public indicated that they were actually seeing increased in-class enrollments, which I would certainly find positive at that kindergarten level. But as we look at home-based learning across K-12, I'm curious if we're seeing any trends.
For that question, I'm going to invite Jerry Creswell, one of our ADMs, back to the table here, and he can expand on the beginning of my response here. What we are seeing in terms of online learning is that obviously there's been a significant reaction based on the pandemic. And I guess it was March of 2020, all of the students went home as a result of the declaration of the pandemic. If we think of that 2019-2020 year as a bit of a baseline, shall we say, for online learning, and again, I don't have perfect recollection of the numbers, and Jerry will attempt to look them up for us here. But our home-based or our online learners in 2019-2020 would have covered more than half of the school divisions, and probably in the neighborhood of 3,000 or so online learners across the province. With the next school year of 2020-21, the online learners that were registered had gone up substantially. So we did have probably a doubling or more of our registered online learners. And at that stage, they were registered with most of our school divisions. Not all of the school divisions, but most of the school divisions did operate online learning. In the current school year, there has been a decline in the number of online learners. It has not gone down as low as it was in the 2019-2020 school year, but it is substantially declined from the second school year in this pandemic.
Yeah, I'd first make a distinction between online learning and home-based education. So home-based education is that education where the parents are responsible for the education of the student, whereas online learning, the teachers in the schools are responsible for and direct the learning of the child. So in terms of home-based education, as of September 30th, 2021, there were 4,539 home-based students in the province, which was a decrease of 123 from the previous year. So the previous year, we did see a significant increase in home-based education, and obviously a large number of those have continued to provide home-based education with a small, like I said, a small decrease, 123 fewer this current year than there was last year.
Thank you, and thank you for that distinction. I was going to have many follow-up questions about the financial part if it was online learning and home-based learning were now combined, but that is not the case. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Of course, these are outstanding recommendations, so I would just welcome and thank you to all that are involved in the important work. But I would welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 21. Moved by Mr. Gowdy. All agreed? 21. Moving along, and just a note to folks, I know we have other items on our agenda, some that are specific to the Ministry of Education. I think we've realized that we're going to run out of time for those ones. We will work to book those in at a time that works into the future. We have some upcoming dates. We wouldn't, this is a message to folks, everyone, because I know everyone's thinking about when they're going to eat and everything else. The committee's will is that if we could, folks are willing to stick around to about 12:15 if we could conclude the chapters that relate to the school divisions. Are folks generally cool with that? No, then yeah, the other ones they're not new recommendations and whatnot either, so. Okay, so then saying that, I'll shift it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office and they'll turn our attention to Chapter 22.
Thank you. Chapter 22 of our 2020 Report Volume 1 reports the results of our second follow-up of recommendations made on Regina School Division's processes for promoting positive student behavior. We made 5 recommendations in our 2016 audit. There were 3 outstanding recommendations for follow-up. By March 2020, the school division implemented the remaining 3 outstanding recommendations. During the 2018-19 school year, the division collected, analyzed, and reported detailed information on attendance. It also collected and reported data on behavior incidents and student suspensions to the board. Analyzing attendance and student behavior enables the division to determine if its initiatives are making a positive difference. The division maintains documented key decisions, discussions, and steps taken to support student attendance in accordance with the division's guidance. Keeping documentation of actions taken to address attendance issues helps provide a consistent course of action and helps it monitor steps taken to promote regular student attendance. By September 2019, the division conducted an annual review of its administrative procedures. Periodically reviewing administrative procedures helps ensure their continued relevance and applicability. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'll turn it over. Of course, we have the update here from the Regina Public School Division that they've implemented this recommendation. Thanks to them for their work on this front. Any comments from the Deputy Minister?
Again, I would just thank the Director of Education, Greg Enyon, at Regina Public Schools, and his team for their diligence in attending to the auditor's recommendations. We appreciate the work that the auditor has done here, and very much appreciate the work of all of the staff at Regina Public School Divisions for attending to these recommendations.
I'd echo that. A big thanks to Director Enyon and their team. I don't say that just because I'm on leave from Regina Public Schools still, but thanks for all the work on this front. Any questions from committee members? All right, I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 22. See Mr. Nerline, all agreed? Okay, that's carried. I'll shift it back over to the Provincial Auditor's Office, and they'll turn our attention to Chapter 35.
Thank you. Chapter 35 of our 2020 report, Volume 2, reports the results of our second follow-up of the Regina Roman Catholic Separate School Division number 81's processes to provide English as an additional language, or EAL programming. We made 4 recommendations in our 2016 audit. 2 recommendations were outstanding for follow-up. We found that by June 30, 2020, the division implemented 1 recommendation and made progress on the other outstanding recommendation. We found the division gives its Board of Education a report each year on the kindergarten to grade 8 EAL program. It plans to incorporate the results of its analysis into future annual reports. Periodic reporting to the board helps the board evaluate the delivery of the EAL program and identify whether program changes are needed. We also found the division developed a process to periodically analyze the results of its EAL program, but did not complete its analysis because of discrepancies in student data collected. For example, data entry by schools was not consistent and accurate. The division recognized meaningful analysis needs consistent and comparable data and plans to take steps to confirm the accuracy and consistency of the data. Periodic analysis helps the division assess the success of its EAL program. For example, the percentage of students progressing, struggling, or achieving desired English proficiency level, and make sure students receive the support they need to improve English language skills. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you to Regina Catholic Schools for the substantial information they've supplied us here on the status update. And I'll turn it over to the Deputy Minister if she has any comments.
I would like to acknowledge that there is a growing need for English as an additional language programming, as well as the importance of importance of English language proficiency for immigrants, refugees, and their families to ensure they not only attain Saskatchewan educational goals, but are also able to contribute positively to Saskatchewan. We're pleased that the auditor found in their follow-up audit that Regina Catholic School Division had implemented 1 recommendation and partially implemented the other outstanding recommendation. And as the chair has noted, the status report provides a substantial piece of information respecting the steps that they have taken to address the final recommendation. As you note from our attendance here in the room, we do not have a member from Regina Catholic School Division with us. Director Sean Chase is the director of Regina Catholic. We do have Stacy Garrison, and I apologize, Stacy, if I pronounced your last name incorrectly, but Stacy is available to us if there are any questions for Regina Catholic School Division.
Thank you very much, and big thanks, of course, to Director Chase and the team over there at Regina Catholic. Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any. Yeah, thanks for the work on this front. Thanks for the detailed work and continued best wishes towards full implementation of that outstanding recommendation. I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 35. Mr. Scoropad, all agreed? That's carried. We'll move along to chapter 35 and I'll turn it over, 34, sorry, and I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor's Office.
Thank you. Chapter 34 of our 2020 report, Volume 2, reports the results of our second follow-up of recommendations on Living Sky School Division's processes to engage grade 7s to 12 students. We made 4 recommendations in our 2017 audit. There were 2 outstanding recommendations, and by June 2020, the school division implemented both of those outstanding recommendations. By June 2020, the division and its schools established targets related to the Our School survey, and its schools analyzed the year-over-year survey results. Having targets increases the ability of the division to assess the impact of its initiatives to engage students in learning. Analysis of survey results at a school level helps schools focus their resources on initiatives that engage students and reduce the potential for initiative overload. I'll pause now for the committee's consideration.
Thank you for the presentation. Of course, this is these recommendations we've already considered at this table and supported them, concurred with them, and we see implementation by Living Sky. We want to say thanks to them for all their work on this front. Deputy Minister Johnson, do you have any comments?
Again, just my thanks to Living Sky School Division, Brenda Vickers, and the director. Brenda Vickers is the Director of Education at Living Sky School Division, and she and her team have done a tremendous job in implementing these recommendations. I think we all recognize that having engaged students increases their success rate and positively impacts their future academic and employment opportunities. Recognize again the importance of the work that the school division is doing in engaging students.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Director Vickers and team. Questions from committee members? Not seeing any, I would welcome a motion to conclude considerations of Chapter 34. I see that from Mr. Friesen. All agreed? That's carried. Okay, folks, thank you very much. Just as a bit of a housekeeping note here before we adjourn for lunch, thank you so much to all the school divisions. Thank you to Deputy Minister Johnson and all the leadership of the Ministry of Education, all those connected to the work here today, and for their time. As far as our agenda, we didn't get through all of the considerations that we had on the agenda. That's fine. These were important considerations here today, so we'll just simply work to follow up with you as a ministry to book those other chapters into some of our dates that are coming forward in the months to come. So again, thanks so much for your time here today and for all your work, and we'll adjourn for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock with the Ministry of Health.